took that up. But to go into a dressing room and say you're celebrating to it, disrespectful. I mean, who is Mourinho to talk about disrespect?
The best analysis of all the week's football from Ireland's #1 football man.
Pogba's a social media star, right? He appeals to the young people now. He does his dance, he has his hair and all that. That's all he's worried about, in my opinion. Not worried about being a great player, Nathan.
John Giles. Every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on OTB Sports Radio, live 24/7 on the Go Loud app.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
And a very good morning to you. Welcome along to a specially extended OTB AM where we're with you all the way until 11 o'clock this morning. We're bringing you the first in a brand new series. It's Keith Wood's State of the Union, where we talk to various people around the world about the state of rugby union at the moment and the precarious situation it finds itself in. We'll get into more details on that a little bit later on. Stuart Barnes and the ex-head of sponsorship for HSBC are our first guests. That's going to air live at 10 o'clock this morning on all our social channels. Indeed, if you're watching this now, you can scroll forward to the very end of the file that you're watching it on and get it in the last hour. We'll also podcast it on its own separate podcast in OTB Rugby on the OTB podcast stream. So you just search OTB Rugby and you should be able to find it. That's all coming up a little bit later on. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts of exactly what the GAA's announced yesterday that effectively kicked any possibility of inter-county action back to October, November. Not a million miles away from kind of what we thought would happen, but good to get a little bit of certainty on that, and we can talk about that. Anthony Moyles is going to join us. We'll find out what the referees' training has been like and what their situation is, and we'll also talk about the state of rugby with Johnny Murphy. That's coming up a little bit later on, but first we want to bring you this. It's Pat Nevin from last night's show. Have a look.
A link with all the running. Today marks the anniversary, not a particularly profound one or anything, but of Roger Bannister in 1954, the 4-minute mile, 3 minutes, 59 seconds, 0.4. And this was always held up as an example of the power of belief, the Bannister 4-minute mile, in that he cracks it first, and there was a sense of, well, others followed very quickly because, there were even rumours you would combust instantly as a human being, crack the 4-minute mile. And I think within a year, they were up to 4 or 5 who'd broken it, and the year after that, 30 or something had broken it. Still not that many have in history, like 1,400, I think, is the total. But it was always held up as this is an example of the power of the mind. And I never quite bought that with Bannister. I just thought natural progression and training meant that it was going to be broken sooner or later, and all the others would have followed either way. Now, not exactly.
He didn't think that way, by the way. He thought none of that.
Did he? Yeah.
He was a doctor. He was an intelligent man. And
he got all that.
Brilliant career afterwards. So he never thought any of that nonsense.
Yes, and it's not exactly lab conditions. But the reason I bring it up, and there is something in it, though, because even you can think of numerous examples. Like, for instance, there was a 10-year period here where a glut of Irish golfers won majors. And they all said, Harrington made the breakthrough. And then they all said, oh, well, I kind of, I know him. It demystified it a little bit. I've seen him make mistakes. I've seen him at his worst. And, McDowell won one and Clark won one. And, well, McIlroy would have regardless, I presume. But the power of belief, is that something that you thought about much as a player? Did you believe in it? The power of the mind, all that kind of stuff, inhibiting beliefs?
I understood it. I always understood it. As a kid, I'd studied psychology anyway. It's one of the sort of things that I'd studied before I became a footballer. So I understood it anyway. And I'd been brought up within the Celtic tradition. I'd been at Celtic as a kid, which had this attitude of, there is only one thing, winning. You know the rest. It's all dull, that's first and worst, all that sort of stuff. And you were really indoctrinated, and it was like Jesuitical, all that sort of stuff. You really were indoctrinated with it. So you kind of had it. But you noticed that other people didn't have it. And I mean professionals didn't have that. And you'd look at them and go, why don't you feel that way? Why don't you understand this concept of that there are only these two positions? And they would kind of just do their best. But no, you will not be able to win. But it gets much easier to win when you know you can. It really is. It's the amount of teams that I've talked to. My classic example, I'd give you from my career, I played for Chelsea for 5 years, and every year we'd go and try and win the FA Cup and hope that we might. And then I went to Everton, who thought, yeah, we should win the FA Cup this year. He said, that's different. One group of players weren't that much better than another group, but that group said, yeah, we should win this. Now, Everton got to the FA Cup final that first season and thought, yeah, that's where we should be. Had it been with that other group of players, it'd been, wow, we're here, this is amazing. And it's a totally different mindset. And it's a kind of lucky to be here kind of thing. In a very, very simplistic way. If you actually think you're going to do it, the chances are you've got a much, much better chance of doing it. And that's the most simplistic way of putting it, but that's at the root of it all. Mm. And the amount of people that I've worked with that I've looked around me. I mean, another great example, again, it's at that level and it's at that level. It's right up there and right, I'm trying to see the camera, right up there, right up there and down there. I remember going, I played for Kilmarnock near the end of my career. I remember a few weeks into my, I thought, not a bad team this actually. These lads are good, you know, they really believe in themselves. I know about 10 or 11 games in, we'd go to play Celtic at Celtic Park. Right, we're ready, lads. Turn round. Silence. Scared to death. And I'm going, you were all right 10 minutes ago, you lot. And just that, and they were beaten before they walked out. They were gone before they walked out. And it's like another cliche, but it's absolutely true. And I'm walking around going, they're only blokes, so these guys, yeah, they're quite good, but we need to fight them. If you think you're not good enough, and so many of them went into their shells in front of Parkhead and all those supporters. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The first time, and then when you beat them once, you think, oh, that's how you do it. But you need to do it that first time. And that's harder when you've got the wrong psychology.
I was going to, well, I guess you sort of answered the next question because I was going to ask, well, let's ask it then, aside from winning and getting that victory and seeing for yourself that it's possible, is there anything a manager can say or do to almost imbue a team with certain belief in themselves?
I've seen a million different ways of doing it. You know, some have tried, humour is a cracker, actually. It really is quite a good one because it relaxes everyone. You think, oh, well, just have a go. You mean it? The shouting and bawling and the fist pumping stuff, very good. Everyone does that. Yeah, that's going to work maybe once if you're lucky. Yeah. But you've got to think a wee bit better than that. You've got to get slightly inside the minds of the most important players. You need to make sure that the leaders are still leading and they're not hiding in a corner as well. You need to make sure when they walk out there, when you're on the ball, you're not seeing a whole big bunch of backsides in front of you and people who don't want to get a ball. You need all those different things. But odd enough, humour is, I found that quite a fun one and a good one. I remember Tam Burns used to play for Celtic in Scotland. He came away with an absolute cracker once. And the Kelly boys told me about it, and he was the Kelly manager at the time, and they were playing against Celtic, and he knew that they had this psychological problem. And he gave them the big talk, and he said, right, lads, completely, I'll be there, I'll be at your backs, and, you know, you'll know where I am all the way through this. You can turn around, you'll know where I am. And the lads go, yeah. And he jumped into the basket where they kept the strips and clothes. Sat in there. I'm not coming out. You lot are going to get hammered. And he was like winding them up, and they just all started laughing at him. And they went out and they got a result on the day. Apparently it was a draw or something like that. So you're lighten it, make sure that you're not going to tense. That's a good thing as well. But for some guys that'll work, for some guys it won't. So you need to know what is the best thing to work for each individual. And the worst thing is, most managers of a certain ilk think there is one way, or they try the one way with everyone. Well, that's not the case because we're all different psychologically. You should be going around, you need that, you need that, you need nothing, you need that, you need that. And you should know those people. And that's how you get better. But I mean, it is that psychological thing, that great moment when you think, we can do this. And suddenly it gets easier.
Yeah. You strike me as a player who would have been maybe at best indifferent to the hairdryer treatment, if not slightly dismayed by the thought of it, especially a regular one.
Well, oddly enough, I was writing about it recently. And I got hammered really when I was about 15, 16. This manager who shouted and bawled and screamed and gave me the whole right up in the face, spit in the face, everything. And I got it every single week for a year. And I could play a year, I was top goal scorer, all that. Every single week I got it during the games, and at half time and after the game I get shouting and screamed and bawled. And he was about 6'1", this guy. I was like, I'm not enjoying this anymore, so I'm not going to play anymore. And he just said at the end of the season, it's a long story on. The shortened version is he just said, I only shout at good players, you know, because there's no point shouting at bad players. And by the way, that was a test you passed. And no one will ever have an effect on you. And a couple of managers tried to. during my career, shouting the ball and screaming right there, and I was like, ball pucked. It had no effect because I knew within myself what I needed to do. But I've watched other people be crushed by it. I've watched other people be lifted by it. I have to tell you, in the scheme of things, more get crushed by it than are lifted by it. Many more. Now, in the old school in the game, they would say to you, well, they weren't strong enough personalities anyway, so that they were going to fold. And maybe I was on their camp in that, in my early days. As time has gone on, you realise, no, people come on at different times. They are personalities. You just have to find the best way to get the best out of them. But I've seen people crushed. It's horrible to see it, like people who could have had decent careers just ruined by that old school thinking.
Yes. And it's funny you mentioned that. I don't know, did I say this to you a while back? It was in Wayne Rooney's article in the Sunday Times. Alex Ferguson, who you wouldn't say was totally progressive when it came to that whole area, but Rooney was making the point. Your face told a picture there. Rooney was making the point that he did pick and choose a little bit. So Rooney felt if, for instance, Ronaldo was giving the ball away too much, then Rooney always got it for giving the ball away too much. Or the other one he always picked on was Giggs. So if Nani was dribbling too much, then Giggs got given it at halftime for dribbling too much. And Ronaldo and Nani would be sitting beside Giggs and Rooney and noticing all this. Now, the downside was Giggs and Rooney had to take this for, well, in Giggs' case, 20-odd years. But at least that showed on Ferguson's part, because, he obviously so successful, had to have many strings to his bow. A certain understanding, probably instinctive as opposed to read in books or picked up, but a certain understanding of various personality types.
I know where he got it from. I know where he stole it.
Jock Stein?
Yeah. And I remember it being explained to me. Danny McGrain explained it to me one day. And he explained what Jock used to do, because he used to want to hammer certain players. But he'd say, they can't take it, so I'm going to hammer you. And he'd tell you beforehand. And you're getting battered. But it's not aimed at you, it's aimed at him who's over there. Who's thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get that next.
Yeah.
He's the one is getting it, really, who's going to get it. He did once, apparently, another one he did with Dalglish, where he told Davy Hay and he told Danny McGrain, he just said, by the way, I'm going to hammer Dalglish today. I'm going to absolutely batter him today. It doesn't matter what he does. Apparently he scores a hat-trick. Came in and hammered him anyway. Absolutely went through him.
Right.
He's done a couple of things that have not... in simplest terms, he's getting a bit big for his boots in the moment. And Stein had to drag him back. So he considered... So it looks like loss of control. I think that's the point you're making about Ferguson. It looks like lack of control and loss of control. When in actual fact, it's not really all the time. There are people that are a lot cleverer than that. And you're right, they will pick and choose the ones. And the worst one, I'm sure I've told you before, I get the worst. I didn't get the hairdryer from Sir Alec. I got worse than that from him.
Ignored.
No, I get silence. I did the wrong thing playing for Scotland against England. And instead of shouting and bawling, he asked me the question. I gave the wrong answer. And he went, he just walked away. I went, I don't think that's going very well. So I didn't get picked for going to the World Cup in '86 under Sir Alec. I didn't do the right thing at that point in time. That was just before the World Cup as well. I was kind of on trial with him. But it was, you actually knew that was worse than a hairdryer, just to get the old. Right.
And do you remember what he asked you? Was it?
Oh, yeah. No, clearly. Yeah, I was playing. We were 2-1 down. I was in the box with Terry Butcher. I dummied him two ways, went round him. Butch took me out. I didn't go down, held my feet, laid the ball back. Roy Aitken smashed it over the bar. After the game, we got beat 2-1 at Wembley. And Sir Alec came over and said, did Butcher catch you in the box? I went, yeah, he did, but I've got decent balance. I managed to hold myself up and not go down. And he just went, and walked away. As if to say, didn't say anything, didn't need to say anything, but I didn't go to Mexico.
Particularly cutthroat.
That was a real kind of moment of, there you go.
Could you tell in that very brief time you might have had with him around then that he was going to be so special?
He already was. In our eyes, in Scottish people's eyes, he was, because of what he'd done with Aberdeen. because Celtic and Rangers had been such a stranglehold on it. Yet there he goes to Aberdeen and manages to put this. You remember, they won a European trophy. It was Aberdeen.
Beat Real Madrid, didn't they, in the final?
Exactly, Real Madrid. It's not when Real Madrid were rubbish. It was Real Madrid. And they had put a lot of good teams on the way there as well. So to do it in a European and realising it's not a one-off because he's beaten Celtic and Rangers in the league, that's pretty spectacularly good. So I think the thinking was at the time he was really highly rated. Whether you thought he would go and do what he did, no. I don't think anyone could have guessed that. That's massive. That's gigantic. That's over and above any expectation. And by the way, just to go back to Sir Alex, I remember asking McClare about that. I said, how many times has the gaffer ran through you, gave you the whole lot? He goes, he tried it once. Never bothered again. Because Brian's so inscrutable, so kind of, aye, right, okay, very good. and he is completely unearthly. You cannot read McClare. And but funnily enough, Sir Alex, Brian was always called Sir Alex Boy, as in his son, and but Sir Alex couldn't read Brian. He could read most people, but he could never read Brian. And he couldn't understand why Brian would take the complete piss out of him and think it was okay and always play tricks on him. Brian used to take him in, I don't know if you know this, Brian used to take him into training every day because he lived nearby, just round the corner. But he'd leave his phone down and Brian would always change the phone because Brian's good with technology. And every time his phone would ring, he would say, Chalky is great, in Sir Alex Ferguson's phone. And he would change the tunes to weird music that Brian and I would like. And like, he had no idea how to change it back. And, just simple things like that. And he knew it was Brian was doing it, and Brian would just sit there laughing.
Wow. I didn't think he was a man you played tricks on like that. There you go.
He isn't. Because he can read most people. He just couldn't read Brian.
Brian is unreadable, though, isn't he? I mean, I've only come to realise this quite late about Brian McClare. We're all unique, but he's definitely unique.
Of all the people, there was two people in my career I ever played with, made me feel like a normal footballer. Brian was one of them, and Neville Southall was the other one. I was closer to a normal footballer than they were. But I'd see Brian quite a lot. Not at the moment, obviously, but we get in touch through Zoom. And he's the same, but he has a wee trick to play if any ever meet up with Brian, which you will in Ireland because he goes over to the Man United supporters clubs around the world. Brian's kind of like that. He's really good with it, the way he does it, helpful in the way he does it. Get him drunk, and then you see the real Brian. There's the clue.
One last Ferguson question. His general demeanour away from, hairdryer and not hairdryer, those very memorable moments, just as a general presence around the place, how would you describe it?
It's away from the ground. It's a lot. Funnily enough, I was talking about this last night to, of all people, Kelly Cates, Kenny's daughter. And it was really interesting to ask her, like, somebody said to us, well, what's it like, when, you have to be a different man in front of the press? And she asked that question to me, and I went, what are you asking me for? You know better than anybody. You watch your dad, who everybody thought was a dour, dull, annoying. All the journalists couldn't cope with Kenny at all. But I knew Kenny because I played with him. He's a right laugh. He's just, he's so funny. He's very dry, but he's very, very funny as well. He's always looking for a laugh with people. And he's an intelligent enough guy as well. And people have to be a different person in different situations. You're not the same talking to me. I know you're in your house, but when you go in and talk to your wife, you'll be a wee bit different to the way you're talking to us, just now. We are different people in different situations. It's basic psychology stuff. And absolutely, the managers are all the same. They are totally different. Kelly was saying last night, well, she was interviewing Davy Moyes. He was in his home in Zoom. Totally different person. Absolutely different. Totally relaxed. The stress isn't on. Okay, we're not in a stressful situation of work just now, but put them in different circumstances and you're seeing a completely different thing. Kenny was a classic example of that. And Sir Alex is exactly the same. It really was exactly the same. But it was always away from the football grounds. That was the difference. Meet him at a football ground if he's the manager was in Scotland, or he's the manager of Man United when I'm playing against Manchester United. It's very businesslike, very strong. You're not getting anything more. You're just getting the dead eyes and the business stuff, right? I remember him once coming around to a training ground at when I was at Everton. When it was about 2 or 3 years into it, and for whatever reason he was there, and he sat down where I was sitting in the canteen place, and honestly he dropped into that calm conversation you'd have with a friend from Glasgow. Now, we're both from rough areas of Glasgow, and it was that conversation. We'd never had that conversation before. We'd never had that relaxed, but we were right in there within a sentence. So take him out of the environment, and the other person's allowed to come back. And Salah he was great, and interesting, enjoyable, very, very, very political, stunningly political, and very hard left at that time, but certainly very much for you. He would talk to me to death about unions, and what the union were doing, what we should be doing, and how he could help, that sort of thing. So take them out of the environment, and yeah, they are different.
That's a great answer. To round this off, there's not much news to talk about, but to bring people up to date who are only casually dipping into Project Restart, as we have to call it now, what's happened of late is that the Aston Villa chief executive, Christian Purslow, has been talking. The plan, as it stands, is neutral venues. And so Purslow has come out and said, well, look, 17 of our 25 points have come at home. We're second from bottom. We've a game in hand on Watford. He said, personally, talking about neutral venues, I'm against it. We're a club that prides itself on home form. 2/3 of our wins this season have come at home. We've got 6 home games left. And I think any Villa fan would agree that giving up that advantage is a massive decision for somebody running Aston Villa. And I certainly wouldn't agree to that unless those circumstances are right. Following that, the League Managers Association chief, Richard Bevan, he was saying that, well, if this isn't passed, if this neutral venue plan isn't passed, he said, yes, I think the season probably will be cancelled. Now, they need 14 of 20. They'll probably get 14 of 20. I don't know how messy all this gets if the other 6 are really, really unhappy about this. And maybe they can, wink and a nod, and certain players say, I don't really want to play in the current circumstances. Like, they can get this thing stopped if they really want to. But that's where we are. I don't know what's jumping out at you over the last couple of days.
I'm amazed. I mean, first of all, that's no different from my position of 7 weeks ago, what Richard Bevan saying just now. I can't imagine you do it in all the grounds. I just can't imagine the logistics. The logistics are hard enough as it is. You take the logistics of everyone had to play their home games at the home grounds, and it's mind-blowing. That travel, that amount of games in that short of time, it's almost unthinkable. Almost all the ideas that you have to go down the route of now are unthinkable. What you have to do in these situations is find a method, the simplest method, a core way where the logistics can be made as easy as possible. And I thought there would be one or two that would say, oh, we need the home games, but would basically crack really quickly because they realised it was not possible. But it sounded a wee bit loud. I think Brighton may have made some noises about it.
Brighton and Villa publicly have come out very strongly, yeah.
Now, fine, you're fighting for your case. You need to fight for your case. But I think, I suspect when they look at the reality, they'll say, actually, that's doable. And it may well be that their game plan, their end game is, remember, it's kind of game theory stuff. Like, they're saying, right, okay, what's the game if we game it this way and then the games don't go ahead? Well, do we stay up? Do we go down? Do they null and void the season? Do they do the average points? They will take all that into consideration. Just sadly, it's the way of business. I just don't think it's going to happen like that. I think what they'll do is they will bend and accept that they will have to play at neutral venues. It may be a number of neutral venues, and they will find that way of getting by it. However, that's not to say it's going to happen. I mean, underline, that's not to say it's going to happen. There's a million things can stop it happening before that gets there. But to add, complexities and more difficulties into what has to be a streamlined, simple way, you're just ruining the chances of you finishing it. I don't know if you heard, they made a big thing about yesterday in the UK. Gordon Taylor had mentioned the fact that maybe 5 subs and the possibility of playing shorter games. The place went mad. Gordon wasn't saying play shorter games. He was just saying there is a problem. One of the problems is with a 4-week run-up, players won't be fit to play 90-minute games 3 times a week. That's what the medics say. Okay, so you look at the problem from the other angle and say, well, shorten the games, and we can play that. It's just an idea. A number of people have come up with it. They're all hammering Gordon Taylor now. What are you saying? How dare you? He wasn't saying that. He was saying, but this is what you take every set of circumstances and you balance them with that one. We are in weird country now.
Yeah.
We're talking about 5 substitutes. Somebody at some point, I don't think I've said it yet, right? I've not said it yet. Trust me, it will happen in the next few weeks. Someone will say the phrase rolling substitutes, right?
Yeah.
It's a step. So there's nothing surer in the world that somebody will say something about rolling substitutes, right? I've not heard it yet. But it's just complete and utter logic.
Yeah.
Total logic. And in situations like this, you need to take these things on board.
Yeah, and in fairness to Taylor, actually, he said that the 45-minute halves had been discussed. He didn't say he thought this was a great idea. It was just in passing in a Radio 4 interview. He said that it was discussed at the meeting. He didn't massively.
That's not how it was promoted in various.
No. Taylor insists on 45-minute halves. Must go. I mean, if you're Purslow, if you're Aston Villa, because he used the figure 200 million to finish up on this point. He said, you get relegated potentially if you don't bounce back straight away. You're looking at 200 million gap. He may figure, you know what, TV money, whatever's still owing to us, if we can get this thing null and voided and we're guaranteed in the Premier League next year, well, I'm game theory in my way to that solution, one way or another. And he just needs the other 5 or 6 who are also looking over their shoulders at relegation to come along with him.
Yeah, but he also has to put it in his mind that almost a lot of other leagues have looked at that concept and said, no, just take it as average points now. You're going down. And which, again, because if you say it null and void, the teams from below, they're going to sue you. They are going to sue. And they'll probably win.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
The Sunday Paper Review on Off the Ball.
When he wants to do something, he does it. A hugely impressive person, apart from being obviously a brilliant golfer.
My cousins disliked their dog so intensely that they renamed it Scalacci.
Yeah.
And the dog was called Scalacci from then on.
It's a great piece of journalism. That sums up what he's like. The intro to this is just brilliant. He is an absolute control freak.
Digesting the best stories on the back pages every Sunday afternoon on Off the Ball.
OTB AM.
And you're very welcome back to OTB AM. It's Jerry Gilroy and Owen Sheehan with you every morning from 7:30 until 10 most mornings, but we're streaming all the way until 11 this morning because we're bringing you Keith Wood's State of the Union, which is an in-depth discussion piece, a series of in-depth discussions that we're going to have about the future of rugby union. It's the future of GAA that we're talking about most this morning, though, Owen. If anybody out there has any questions that you want to ask or anything that you need cleared up, 0879 180 180. The GAA statement yesterday brought a fair bit of clarity, I would say. Now, they're still getting hammered by various different people for leaving some wiggle room open to themselves, but they're in a fairly clear damned if you do and damned if you don't scenario at the moment. For clarity's sake, in case anybody missed this, essentially they've said there will be no inter-county action until October, essentially at the earliest. They've said they don't expect any until October, which gives them a little bit of wiggle room, but that club action won't be available at least until after everybody is going to train in July for the first time. So they're not going to have any small groups of social distance training, which a lot of people have been hoping for as lockdown was easing.
Yeah, and it had been something that had been mentioned in the roadmap published on Friday as well. It seemed to me that there was a possibility for some very minor GAA activity, and it's what you mentioned there, the socially distanced training that could have gone ahead throughout stage 2 and 3 maybe of the roadmap. But the GAA have come out yesterday and said there will be nothing until stage 4, which is obviously July the 20th. What happens after that? Like, you get into a situation where it's stage 5 that was mentioned, where Gaelic games and small behind closed doors activities could have taken place at that point. I think actually it might have been in the stage 5 part of the roadmap actually on Friday. So like this is still a question mark that's up in the air about all of this, that the government have specifically mentioned the GAA last week, and it seems that the GAA themselves are unsure whether or not that's an achievable target.
Like, certainly you would assume that the conversations were a bit more open between the two organisations, and it will be interesting to see which organisation says what conversations have been happening and who breaks ranks on that. Say if there were no conversations happening, that doesn't make any sense from the government's perspective. And if there were conversations happening, it doesn't seem as if communication was very clear on both sides, because they do seem to have slightly different viewpoints here. Even if you think back, I don't know if you heard the Sunday paper review, there was talk about letting the kids back first, and there was kind of, you know, not a million miles away from what Luke O'Neill was saying when he was talking about, you know, it's possible that you could have underage action first, and then ultimately that could grade up to, you know, you could have an under-30s challenge match, friendly, whatever, street league if you needed it at some point later on in the year. There was some hope, I know, among parents that coming to Munskill or the cool camps in the summer, that kind of stuff would actually happen, that you'd be able to go down, have kids playing. I don't know who would actually be the mentors. You probably need to get some teenagers in to do it. But that some kind of graduated return would happen in line with the lockdown roadmap that was published last weekend. No sign of that. So nothing's going to happen now, essentially, until July.
No, just to kind of reiterate what the line is from the roadmap document. So July 20th, it said permit sports teams leagues, for example, soccer and GEA, but only where limitations are placed on the number of spectators and where social distancing can be maintained. Now, I'm sure that there's other parts of the roadmap that they move to clarify first, but is the intention that where social distancing can be maintained, that pertains to the spectators at an event, or that goes for everybody involved?
No.
That goes for all the players?
And so Éanna Falvey's done a full page interview in the Irish Times today with Jerry Thornley, and he's talking about contact, right? And everybody's like, oh, it's contact sports. Players are going to be in contact with each other. He's like, well, hang on, everybody. Basically, without getting too pedantic about it, the term contact is used in epidemiology by the World Health Organization. Contact means is whether or not you've been exposed to an infected person. So say Jerry Thornley's infected right now. The World Health Organization guidelines say that me being a contact of yours means that I've been face-to-face with you within 1 metre for more than 15 minutes, or you would be providing care for somebody who's been sick with COVID-19, or you'd be sharing a house or a workplace or a classroom with somebody who has COVID-19. Basically, this means being in close proximity, because the data out there to date is around aerosol droplet spread. It's not actually about physical contact, if that makes sense. So essentially, all those guidelines that we all had in work before everybody was told to go home, that, you know, you were on the other side of the desk here, and that was totally fine because, you know, we weren't spitting in the air, and it wasn't for longer than 15 minutes. He's actually gone down to the point where most international props play 60 minutes, and in that the average time would be 8 scrums, a minute per scrum. So they would actually be fine if they weren't also stuck in a ruck for more than 7 minutes over the course of that match. That's the level that the World Rugby are getting to, where they're analysing, you know, what protocols will have to be in place to mitigate the risk. This is obviously a professional sport, right? But you can see where that whole contact in a match is at the lower end of the acceptable level of risk. And then it's well, what if I bring something home to people? I suspect that if you are involved with somebody who has an immune difficulty or an underlying condition, then you're actually going to be essentially cocooning or socially distancing anyway. So you're probably not going to be available for a selection for those games.
Without question, that's probably what we kind of considered as well. And not even those people who are cocooning as well, those people who perhaps just had to go to work in a hospital when it came to amateur games. Like, there's no way you could see them being put into a position where they might be exposed to risk in a contact or semi-contact game. That it's just not viable. I guess we're kind of talking about the best case scenario, the young people, the healthy people who are in a situation to not put others at risk. But that's an unbelievably hard thing to pin down. I think when it comes to the GEA statement yesterday, I think it's clear that they want to try and get people into stadiums at some point this year. I'm not saying they want to get full stadiums this year, because that's clearly not going to happen. But I mean, socially distanced GEA events, perhaps around a championship. And that's why they've kicked the whole thing back to October at the very least. That's my view on why they're saying what they're saying. But it is interesting what Éanna Falvey is putting out there for sure, because there was definitely some confusion about why exactly there was a distinction made between soccer and GEA and rugby.
Well, actually, it's funny. He's disappointed that distinction was made because he doesn't think that it should have been made. And from granted, the small sample size and the echo chamber of social media, there was a lot of people in the GEA world and pundits going, well, I mean, how can this be considered different from rugby? It was almost as if like the commentariat wanted the GAA to be more conservatively graded, and rugby is like pissed off that it was as conservatively graded as it was with judo and wrestling, and wanted to be at the same level as GAA. And I guess that's the amateur versus professional. It doesn't. From yesterday's announcement, it seems like there's a good chance that there won't be any intercounty this year. Like realistically, it seems like they're trying to prepare the ground for some sense of that happening, and you can see a lot of people calling for that. And I just don't know if that's necessarily if hurtling that direction at the moment. And I'm not saying the GAA are doing that. I'm saying that there are definitely pockets who are very vocal, who are calling for this to happen immediately. And I don't know if that's necessarily the right thing just yet.
Is it a bit ridiculous that, like, I mean, it's great to get a professional view from someone like Dana Falvey, but it's kind of ridiculous that was the debate for the last couple of days about whether or not GAA should be in stage 4 or stage 5. Should it be considered with wrestling and judo? Should it be considered with soccer? And then rugby, should it be considered up with GAA, as you say? Like, that's really not the argument that needs to be had. Like, I find it interesting as well from the GAA statement yesterday that they simply won't allow any small gatherings of socially distanced GAA players. I guess having a ball, that means you probably, if you're using one ball to actually kick between players, that probably takes away the whole point of social distancing. But on the flip side, like you had Davy Fitzgerald coming out yesterday, kind of not really unhappy actually that this has been done, especially because there is, as we say, the roadmap out there where from May 18 you're supposed to have public sports amenities to be open where social distancing can be maintained. Then on June 8, you were supposed to have people being allowed to engage in outdoor sporting and fitness activities, which would have included pitches. And then you would have got behind closed door sporting activity involved on June 29th. There was definitely an option within the government's roadmap for the GAA to get back to socially distanced training sooner than July 20th.
Yeah, and I'm sure that must be very disappointing for anybody who is involved with the team and would really like that social contact and would really like to get back out and be involved in that sport.
Does it tell us something about how the GAA view the entire organisation wants to give the green light? Like they obviously have a duty of care. So what happens if, say, June 8th or June 29th, one of those two stages, they said, right, you can go back into your small groups of 4, and then suddenly there's 20 viral videos online of 20 people going training. Do they feel that they would then have the burden of responsibility and it would be a bad PR exercise for them? Maybe, and maybe that's why they've come out and done this. Or maybe perhaps more trust should be put into the clubs to actually follow through with these sort of protocols earlier than July 20th. It speaks to a lot of things. Like we're obviously just kind of guessing about what the actual intentions are here. But one thing is for certain, I think, as you mentioned there, the idea that we might be crowning an All-Ireland champion in either code this calendar year seems fanciful at this point.
Yeah, unless it's like there's 4 names drawn out of a hat for a weekend blitz, and sometime in December it's like, oh well, come on down Leitrim, All-Ireland hurling champions for 2020, congratulations. I don't know what the answer here is going to be, but the notion that we would just have a club year this year is taking hold from strong voices from the club scene. Is that a possibility? Like, is that we just have inter-county, we have internal county club matches, and that's the sum total of GAA activity this year?
I think if this notion of localised easing of restrictions becomes a reality soon, which it might do, because it was mentioned in the roadmap as well last Friday, and that is definitely something that you could see happening, where certain counties are able to follow through with their own ideas. I personally just have my own suspicion about that and the whole localised element of lockdown restrictions easing, because if that happens, will there be a national easing of travel, for example, and people will travel from affected areas to non-affected areas, and that would become, there will be anecdotal evidence of people travelling all around the country, and that might shut it down. But anyway, I think that it is a possibility for sure that the club comes back first. How much safer or less safe would it be than the inter-county game? Like, I'm not sure. I think obviously at the inter-county game, at the top level of the game, you have a bit more professionalism involved, more staff members, bigger stadiums potentially available to you, and maybe the option of isolation for even a few days before games is a possibility, whereas at club level, I just can't see that happening.
Alan Milton has been speaking this morning saying that the players were released from inter-county squads because training loads wouldn't be healthy if the target is October. Social distancing could be breached if groups gather, and these could be recorded by the public. They don't want to be explaining situations, so essentially that point that you were making there. The various Premier League footballers who were training in small groups who became cause celebs at various stages over the last few months seem to have ruined it for everybody, Owen. And the GAA are open to holding 2 championships next year. And while behind closed doors would be better than no championship in 2020, it's seen as a last resort. You can get more from that over at offtheball.com. He's been speaking with John Duggan. Again, difficult situation for them because obviously they're in a scenario that they haven't planned for and don't really know exactly what's coming next. And even Éanna Falvey, obviously, who has access to, he says, 80 chief medical officers from different countries around the world feeding into World Rugby, they're all in a very different scenario as well. Australia and New Zealand both look like they're going to have rugby back up and running fairly soon. Australia's way ahead of everybody when it comes to getting sport going, and with the exception of Germany, obviously. But they have managed to flatten the curve. Their reinfection rate is 0 at the moment. And so he was saying that there's a possibility that Australia and New Zealand might be able to play against each other. This, again, is the scenario where these countries have moved to that point pretty quickly. Like, if we got to that point in 2.5 months' time, who's to say we won't, for example, does all this then get ripped up and it's like, shit, we can actually go here in September. Let's go.
Listen, I'm all for that. Like, I'm all for changing your mind. Like, I don't think that anything that we do, especially when it comes to these roadmaps, should be put in concrete at the moment. Like, part of me thought when the GAA statement came out yesterday, God, they've acted quite drastically here. To actually say nothing until October in terms of intercounty, that's quite a long way away. Who knows what might happen between now and then. But then if they change their mind, who cares? Like, who's actually going to be saying, well, they said October, and now all of a sudden intercounty teams might be allowed to train in the middle of September. It's like, I don't think anybody, I don't think anybody in their right mind would be able to actually say that that's a big issue. I think people will welcome the return of activity when it is safe to do so. And if they're being cautious now in terms of what they're planning, that's great, because at least they're checking any unrealistic expectations. And you'd rather be in that position where you're disappointed because the GAA were right and there was no hope of intercounty before the autumn time, rather than them being completely wrong and saying, well, they promised us GAA in September, and it's September now, and this country is still way too unsafe to step outside your front door. So, I think 100% we have to give everybody the ability to change their mind right now.
All right, 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number if you want to get in touch with us. You can always tweet us using the hashtag OTBAM. We've obviously been talking a lot about the depiction of GAA on TV recently, but who are the best GAA players who have never actually played in real life? Owen has put together his 7-a-side GAA team made up of fictitious characters on screen. Have a look.
Normal People has once again put GAA into the international spotlight, with millions of viewers tuning in every single week to see if Connacht does indeed make the Sligo minor team. Here is my fictitious 7-a-side GAA team in either code. We're going to start with the goalkeeper position, and in goals we have the goalie who came up against Connacht in episode 1 in Normal People. Just kidding. He was shite. The goalkeeper we've gone for is Cahill from the movie Dead Meat, because I suspect that Cahill's puckouts might be absolutely unreal. Exhibit A.
Oh, now go! We have her! We have her!
So he's literally decapitated a zombie there with a hurley. Does he have the power to take a puck out in a 7-a-side game? Probably. Next up, we've got Sergeant Tom Brandt from Blitz, played by Jason Statham, and I'm putting him in at full back because my sort of full back has this sort of philosophy on hurling.
This, lads, is a hurling. Used in the Irish game of hurling. Cross between hockey and murder.
So fuck, mate.
If you haven't seen Blitz, this scene involves Sergeant Tom Brandt beating up 3 kids with a hurley, making him the most terrifying man to ever pick up a hurley, after Diarmuid the Rock O'Sullivan. At centre-back, we've got Connell from Normal People. Now, you'll have noticed in episode 1 of Normal People, he was wearing 10 on his back. completely out of position. He's not a wing forward. Even that goal, completely lucky. He shanked the ball into the back of the net. Let's be straight about it. So I think if we move him further away from goal, we can get peak Connell. And I suspect there might be a big future for him at centre half back. Onto the midfield, and we've got James Ignatius Rooney from the movie Rooney in midfield. And he might be the most complete hurler we have in the team, taking his talents from St Vincent's GAA to Croke Park, destroying all comers. He's a man, he's a myth, he's a legend. He's obviously a legend because he doesn't exist. He is possibly the most complete fictitious athlete since White Goodman in dodgeball. Joining Rooney in midfield is Phil Kelly from The Clash of the Ash. Now I know what you're going to say, he's used to playing more as an inside forward, as a corner forward with his club, but I think he's too good for there. We're going to bring him out to the pitch, into midfield. One of the most skillful fictitious hurlers I've ever seen. And he's also got a lot of passion. He's got a bit of an aggression that we're going to need in this team.
Where is he? You can forget about him! Get on you, Currier! There'll be no job in the bank for you!
At centre forward, we've got the kid from the Kilfinnan Brua Under-12 B team who appears in Brain Eater. He is one of the riskiest fictitious hurlers I've ever seen and can also boast of having the ability to take a zombie's head clean off. He's also going to be our free taker because, well, look at this accuracy. As the old saying goes, if you can put a slitter into a zombie's eye, you can put a slitter over the black spot. And finally, we've got the unnamed guy from the Barry's ads.
See ya.
See you.
He's a grand lad, Connor. And he's turned into a lovely footballer. A very sweet player.
Yeah. Very sweet.
Very sweet player? Must be a corner forward. However, I've got good news for you, unnamed man from Barry's ad. I'm making you captain.
So, did you hear he made me captain?
That's a pity. I was hoping he'd drop you.
Why?
Well, if you weren't training so much, you might have a bit more free time.
So that's our fictitious 7-a-side GAA team complete. Congratulations to everybody who made it. Commiserations to everybody who didn't, except for you, the constable from the Black and Tans who appeared in The Wind That Shakes the Barley holding a hurl. Yeah, don't think hurling is your game. For some reason, just felt like your heart wasn't in the old GAA.
It turns out that Barry's had invented sex on TV as opposed to normal people own.
Yeah, the tension there is unbearable and probably too steamy for 8:17 on a Thursday morning.
Come here, I didn't realise that there was such a genre, really, as hurlers versus zombies. It turns out that this is like, obviously been this entire subculture in Ireland for the last decade and a half, 2 decades, and I had no idea about it.
It's mad. It's fantastic. Clearly, if you want a weapon to take down the zombie, what happens if after COVID-19 the next thing we have to worry about is a zombie apocalypse? Get your hurleys out. Canning hurleys will be doing unbelievable business if there's a zombie apocalypse, I dare say.
Where did you see Clash of the Ash?
I saw it on YouTube.
Is the whole thing there?
Yeah, the full Clash of the Ash is on YouTube. It's great. It's so obviously I got a bit carried away watching a lot of that stuff yesterday, but I didn't have time to watch the full thing. But I need to go back and watch it. It's properly good. That the hurling scenes in that and in Rooney, like Rooney is. Have you seen Rooney? Like it's we had Sean Crossan in last year talking about his GAA on film book, and it was the first time I'd actually seen it. It's hilarious, properly funny, and really good depiction of hurling as well.
And so sorry, Rooney's on YouTube as well, is it?
Yeah, both of those are fully.
Right.
Everything there is fully available on YouTube, I think, except for maybe not the full Dead Meat, but certainly that hurling scene, or the scene with the hurley of Dead Meat is on YouTube.
Okay, good stuff there. That whole thing is up on our social channels now for you, and we might put some links up to those YouTube. You can look them up yourselves. You know how YouTube works, for God's sake. 18 minutes past 8 this morning here, and the GAA has convened a 14-person COVID-19 advisory group. The association remains committed to producing club and inter-county championships this year. However, the latter won't occur until October at the earliest, we expect now. With that in mind, counties have been instructed to suspend inter-county training for now. And I think reminded as well about insurance issues too. The GAA maintains there is no appetite within the association to play games behind closed doors, but that position may change. In soccer, the Aviva Stadium is believed to be under consideration as a single venue to host League of Ireland games upon its return. All team sports are obviously suspended until the 20th of July at the earliest, as per the government's roadmap. But Niall Quinn says playing games at one neutral venue is an option being considered. The 15th of May has been confirmed as the Bundesliga's return date. That's 8 days away from now, before we all row in behind one of the Berlin teams, or indeed perhaps Borussia Dortmund. The German Football League communicated the date to its 36 clubs last night. It follows the federal government's decision to allow the top two divisions resume behind closed doors training. And in cycling, there could be a women's Tour de France as soon as 2022. Earlier this week, cycling's world governing body, the UCI, included a women's Paris-Roubaix on its revised calendar for the first time. Christian Prudhomme says a women's equivalent could ideally take place after the men's edition the year after next. Here's what's coming up for you this morning. Anthony Moyle is going to join us around about 8:40 after we bring you through the sports pages to talk to us about various things that are happening. Obviously, the GAA's response yesterday. We'll get the club players' view, and we might also talk a little bit of economics with him. Martin McAnally is going to talk to us about our Off the Couch today, and Eric Killeen is doing that for us, Johnny Murphy is with us from 9:30, and Keith Wood's State of the Union at 10 o'clock this morning. Time for the sports pages.
OTB AM.
Starting obviously, as we always do, with offtheball.com, and it is I got silence Pat Nevin on the menacing Alex Ferguson dressing down. So he was telling the story, if you missed it a little bit earlier on, that he didn't get the hairdryer treatment from Ferguson. It was worse than that. Ferguson asked him a question, he got the answer wrong. Ferguson kind of looked at him and walked off, and that was the end of that. Pierluigi Collina was arrogant. It was heartbreaking. It's Kevin Kilbane and Russell Osman talking about Everton making it all the way to the Champions League and then getting knocked out by Villarreal. I didn't want to be captain. Sean Fitzpatrick talking about playing for the All Blacks. And we cannot let hurling die. This is centuries of our tradition. Brilliant stuff from Paul Rouse, as usual. If you haven't read his book, The Hurlers, now's a good time to dig it out. It's kind of got this amazing cinematic opening where a team is heading over to New York, and all sorts of great stuff in that as well. So I recommend that if that's one of the things that you do during lockdown, then get to it.
The Irish Independent this morning leads with the story from the GAA yesterday. 2020 All-Ireland looks further away. Cautious approach sees suspension of GAA activity continue for another 11 weeks. If it was me, I would risk health to play, says Kilkenny legend Tommy Welsh. Meanwhile, and Gavin says, I won't manage Dubs again. So Jim Gavin has been speaking, saying that he wouldn't return to the Dublin manager's job. He's been doing an exclusive online interview with a former schoolmate, Jim Kelly of Lansdowne Yonkers FC. And Gavin quashed any possibility of him returning to the role. I don't see that happening, he said. I really gave it as much as I could for as long as I could. And I was involved in enough teams that fragmented is probably the polite way to put it. And elsewhere in the Irish Independent then this morning, how golf plans to get back on course. Neil Francis writing about how the IRFU needs to stand shoulder to shoulder with its patrons, and Quinn hints Aviva as likely venue for League of Ireland games.
The Irish Times this morning leads with GAA happy to play the waiting game. That's the headline on Sean Moran's piece dealing with the statement that came through yesterday. And questions raised as to why players can't train in small groups. That's David Fitzgerald, I guess, and a bunch of other people are kind of asking, can we not just go training? The Australian Open could be cancelled due to COVID-19. It was able to take place in January. So the Australian Open was able to take place in January as scheduled, but French Open organisers obviously moved the clay court major back to September. Will that happen now in September? I mean, maybe. Next year might not escape. Worst case scenario is no Australian Open, he told everybody yesterday. And then they've got that full page interview with Éanna Falvey, which is good on detail about how contact sports aren't actually contact per the World Health Organization guidelines.
The Irish Examiner this morning leads with Kieran Shannon's piece, time to give serious thought to writing off the season. And he's right here, really, isn't it? Like, it's definitely a possibility that the GAA Championship won't happen this year. And if it can't happen this year, is it really viable to play two of them next year, especially if you go into 2021 with an air of unknowing? So Kieran Shannon saying that the purgatory that the players are existing and the managers are existing in at the moment just is far worse than the situation of calling off the entire thing. This is an interesting story here as well in the Examiner. Cahill stopped day-to training before GAA's call. This is Waterford hurling boss Liam Cahill, who was on Zoom to his players last week and actually stepped in ahead of the GAA and stopped them from doing their own bits and pieces alone and stuff. Just called the thing off because he said clarity was really important. Turns out he was right. Straight knockout championship planned for autumn. Writes John Fogarty and Owen Cormack, and it will have to be championship, you'd imagine, if anything's going to happen this year. And then you've got quotes there as well from Tommy Welsh again. Without a vaccine, I'd be worried for other people, he says.
The Daily Mail, their back page headline this morning is, that's the UK one, we'll send you down, the Premier League clubs. And then this one here is GA back on hold, GA scrap plan to return amid rising concerns. And then that's a picture of Sun Heung-min in South Korea on duty. And beaten Pichot to quit World Rugby is the other story that they have there. Argentinian revolutionary Agustin Pichot is said to quit World Rugby after his election defeat. He won 23 out of 51 votes, but apparently that's not enough. Swing voters like Japan and Fiji were lured away by short-term promises, and he is out.
The Mirror this morning leads with a photograph of Manuel Neuer trying to get to a ball there. Germans off to a flyer. Premier League given hope as the Bundesliga is set to be first to return to action in May. Counties wait until October is the line on the GEA, and then a few football stories in at the top. Souness says days of huge wages over. A story about the Aviva then as well. One stadium idea for League of Ireland matches, according to Niall Quinn, and United told to wait for Sancho. Just on the Bundesliga, just had a quick look at the table there. Fortuna Dusseldorf is the team you want to get on for a bandwagon, because they're in a relegation scrap. They're on 22 points, 4 points behind 15th place Mainz. And then there's a load of teams on 27, 28. So you want a relegation scrap instead of going for Munich or Dortmund. And I don't know, supporting a team to qualify for a European place is always a boring activity. So Fortuna Dusseldorf, you have a new fan.
Okay, looking forward to that. Dusseldorf, good city, bad city. It was an important meeting point for some peace process meeting. At one point, John Hume had a Dusseldorf meeting, I think.
Well, I've just realised actually that there's a playoff in the Bundesliga relegation, isn't there? That the team that finishes third bottom actually goes into a playoff. So actually, there's no jeopardy for Dusseldorf. You want to be going for Werder Bremen then, who are actually below them and in the automatic relegation positions. So Dusseldorf or Bremen, take your pick. But I'm going to buy both jerseys right now.
The back page of the Irish Sun this morning. Project non-starter. Bundesliga back, but Prem is project non-starters. There one clubs to let stars opt out if they want, agree or lose the season. Premier League clubs have been warned, agree to neutral venues or the season will be cancelled. And there's a thought that maybe that's what Villa are trying to get to happen. But then there's also the threat that they'll just relegate the bottom three in the table as it stands. October, Davy keen to train. Davy Fitzgerald has questioned the GA's request to suspend all inter-county training after Croke Park revealed there will be no county games until at least October. And League of Ireland won for the neutrals. That's the plan that they have to use the Aviva as a neutral stadium.
The back of the Irish Daily Star this morning goes with the headline, Cruel Summer, no inter-county until October, no club activity until July 20th, and GA managers voice big concerns. Davy Fitzgerald, the most vociferous of those. Germans' leap of faith, meanwhile, is the headline of Manuel Neuer in training, and League of Ireland could play on at the Aviva.
Okay, so after the Star, we got the Telegraph for you, and the Telegraph this morning, I just don't have right in front of me. Here we go. Germany leads way with football and racing, ready to restart. League 1 and 2 set for vote to end season. Celebrations to be banned on Premier League returns, so there'll be no more jumping up and down on players and rubbing up against them, rubbing your COVID up at them. And then that is, again, Sun Heung-min, barely recognisable in his camouflage army uniform with a gun slung over his shoulder. But we're going to get used to watching players playing masks, perhaps. And no scrums, tackles or mauls. RFU plans for reduced rugby. Not quite what Aina Falvey is saying, but this is an exclusive from Gavin Mayers, the chief rugby correspondent of The Telegraph. By rugby activity, we are definitely not talking about 15-a-side, full-on contact rugby, said Steve Granger, the RFU's Director of Rugby Development. There are a whole range of activities you could create without having 16 people in a scrum. That's probably the most invasive and intensive form of contact that we're going to have, or a pile of people in a ruck. Essentially, rugby league.
Mm-hmm.
Rugby league seems to be the perfect rugby sport right now for the post-COVID era, right?
For tag rugby.
I mean, you can actually have proper. So, if Alvy's talking about, like, if I tackle you around the legs, that's less.
Fine.
Exactly. Well, it's far less risky. You can accept that is less risky than us being in the scrum side by side, breathing all over each other.
Mm-hmm. How would we transfer with our rugby union team? Are you any good at rugby league?
I don't know. I mean, we have at least got one of the best coaches in the world for this new scenario.
Well, that's a very good point.
So we're well stocked with that.
Yeah, I for one welcome our new rugby league direction. Let's do it. And Andy Farrell, rugby league Grand Slam winner with Ireland. Right, will I move on to The Guardian?
Yeah.
They're leading with a cricket story here. Test players face 9 weeks away from family. This is to do with Test cricket's plan to get back underway this summer with a series of tests between England and the West Indies. And as it suggests in the headline there, they're thinking about isolation techniques for the entire England squad. And Villa confirm opposition to plan for neutral grounds finish. Bundesliga back this month, meanwhile, green light for first major European league to resume. And a new start, how women's game can recover after a long hiatus.
The London Times have some pretty interesting stories here. Chance to watch every game. That's Leo Messi, by the way, with the mask on. Masked Messi back in action. Chance to watch every game on TV. So they're saying that football fans will be able to watch almost all 200 remaining matches in the Premier League and Championship live, with scheduling officials and broadcast partners looking to give as many fixtures as possible a slot. This will be wild, like a 2 o'clock kickoff, a 4 o'clock kickoff, a 6 o'clock kickoff, an 8 o'clock kickoff for a number of days in a row. The proposal is dependent on the government giving permission for football to resume. The Times understands the scheduling plan already has government support because it'll help to keep people indoors and dissuade some fans from trying to gather at the neutral venues being used by their teams. The German government yesterday gave the green light for the Bundesliga to return, but the intention is to stage 3 or 4 Premier League and Championship games every day at different kickoff times until the end of July. 92 Premier League games left to be played and 108 in the Championship.
A lot of television.
All football, all the time. Football, 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 all football, all the time.
Well, if they can get away with like doing these incredible production, bringing these incredible production values to the table, then I'd be all for it. So like, it's actually a live fly on the wall documentary. Cameras on the dressing room wall, audio attached, mic'd up managers, mic'd up refs, mic'd up players, special camera angles, special access. Then it becomes a really appealing product for the full day.
One of the things that was very noticeable from watching any of the Italia 90 games, or indeed Euro 88, was Mick McCarthy's voice carries. In a full stadium, full of drunk Irish and English fans, you can hear Mick McCarthy screaming, and particularly in the Holland game, when the game peters out, you can totally hear him screaming. It's going to be interesting to hear the language being used by many Premier League players at the moment as the games progress, as the silence of the eerie, empty stadium becomes the thing that we're most aware of acutely. And then suddenly it's like, footballer X screaming abuse at footballer Y and dropping swear bombs all over the place. And there's no way around it. Or when they get to the referee and start screaming in his face, it's like, everybody can hear you, right? Because there's nothing to drown you out here.
Well, I'm just looking forward to hearing what the likes of Jamie Vardy are actually saying. He just seems to be yapping a lot, even when he scores and he runs to the opposition crowd, basically 9 times out of 10, gloats in front of them, and then usually says something while he's got his hands cupped to his ears. I want to be able to hear what Jamie Vardy's actually saying. I think the person we probably hear most from is someone like Jordan Henderson, who seems to be shouting quite a lot. Even when there's no need to shout, he does tend to do that quite a bit. So I think we'll hear a lot from him.
I'd like to see Wayne Rooney. I mean, I will watch all of Derby's games just to hear what Wayne Rooney's saying on the pitch.
Like, I would love to turn back the clocks to when Wayne Rooney first started and have him mic'd up. Yeah. Like when he was a brat as a kid, like the stuff he used to say to referees just looked unbelievable.
Yeah.
And to opponents.
Yeah. No, 100%. Right. The last one there was the Derby and the Oaks might run off on the same day at Epsom, but there's a debate about whether or not they're going to be able to close off the Epsom track and make it safe. But it could be the 4th of July that you'll have both. The Derby was due to take place on the 6th and the Oaks was due to take place the day before, but now they're looking at keeping it all the way back to the 4th of July, and that will be a big day's racing. And I think there's a lot of that stuff that we have to look forward to over the course of the summer, where there will be a lot of us watching a lot of things that maybe in the past we would have gone, that's interesting, I'm interested in these 2 things that are happening today, I'm going to watch this one. But some of them will actually have our undivided attention, unless of course the meaningless dead rubber at the end of the season between 2 mid-tier championship matches, 2 mid-tier championship teams is on at the same time, and that's the only thing that anybody's watching. Right, I just want to tell you about this. There's been so many examples of people around the country doing fairly remarkable things. Dubliner Mick Quinn has so far raised over 30 grand in 3 days for MS Ireland after successfully running a marathon in his back garden last weekend in memory of his brother Frank. They had initially set a target of 15 grand and the target is now 35 grand. You can donate at Mick Quinn's Marathon for MS Ireland. If you just search for that, Mick Quinn's Marathon for MS Ireland, and if you can donate to that, if that's a cause that is close to your own heart. This is a famous publican, obviously, Toner's Pub. I think people will have seen the pictures of this funeral doing the rounds maybe in the last month. And anyway, Mick Quinn has done his marathon. I think he did it in a Tyrone jersey as well. So fair play to him. He's already raised just over 31,000 euro and is aiming for 35 grand. So we wish him all the best. And if anybody can donate, Mick Quinn's Marathon for MS Ireland is what you need to get into there. So next, we're going to hear a little bit from Kevin Kilbane and Leon Osman. Obviously, no live sport, no problem. Virgin Media Sport are airing over 10 hours of classic games each weekend to celebrate some of those great moments in sport. I know next weekend they're going to be doing the Juventus-Manchester United's second leg from 1999, which is one of the best sports matches involving an Irish person that I can remember. 2 Irish people that I can ever remember. But anyway, last night Kevin Kilbane and Leon Osman joined Joe to chat through Everton's ill-fated Champions League run. Have a look.
Yeah, they were a brilliant side. We knew we had the toughest straw of the lot when we got it. When, you know, there was a lot of conspiracies around it that because Liverpool won the Champions League the season before, we had 5 English teams in the Champions League, and we were given the toughest straw because of that. There's a number of things going around it. But yeah, we'd lost the first leg. We probably lost the tie at Goodison, if truth be known, because we just didn't play well. We didn't perform at Goodison. I actually played left back. It's one of the first times I ever played left back in my career. I think it actually could have been the first time I played left back in my career. So we had to go a little bit more attacking. So I went left back, and he changed the team around a lot to try to get a result. And we actually played well. We did well in the game. I've been refed by Kalina a couple of times playing for Ireland. And I always found him really personable and actually decent on the pitch. I always remember that night, for some reason, Kalina was very aloof, very off. He was. I thought he was actually a bit arrogant that night. He wouldn't talk to you, very dismissive, putting his hand in your face if you wanted to have a conversation with him. And it stemmed. I don't know if it stemmed from maybe a couple of challenges that had gone in early on in the game. I don't know. We were maybe having to force the issue a little bit. But Kalina across the whole night, I felt he reffed the game very badly. I really did think that. And judging him from, he was considered the best in the world at that particular time. I think he'd refereed World Cup finals and refereed on the big stage, Champions League finals. And we thought we had the best, and I thought he was poor that night. And I remember the incident. I'd been taken off actually during the game. We thought that was obviously going to take us to extra time, and there was only a few minutes left in the game. Corner come in. I think Mikel put a corner in, Mikel Arteta, and we didn't see anything wrong with it. Duncan, free header, scored, put us back into the tie, and that was it. Game on. But it was heartbreaking. I remember being on the bench. It was heartbreaking. Yeah.
Leon, sickening.
Yeah, it was. You know, just to expand on Kevin's point, from my point of view, I'd never been reffed by Kalina before, so you know, I was kind of looking forward to it as much as you can to be reffed by a certain person. You know, this was a world-renowned star.
Yeah.
And you know, he's going to be referee in this game. I think maybe I was the guy. I was subbed that night. I think I might have come on for Kevin.
You did, yeah.
Midway through the second half. So, you know, to get on, we felt that decisions had gone against us. It's also my first time of playing European football, you know, over the ties. So you knew the referees were going to be a little bit picky about challenges that might you get away with in the Premier League. But even more so on that evening, he didn't allow anything to flow or to be free or football to go. So, you know, to get to that position right at the end when you think the big man's popped up with a vital goal for us, only to have it ruled out for somebody else making a foul. It really was sickening. We didn't really know how to process it, and it was it actually took the stuffing out of us from what had been a fantastic season before, you know, potentially starting well. That team probably took the stuffing out of us till October and November maybe, before we really got ourselves going again as a team.
Yeah, great stuff there from Leon Osman and Kevin Kilbane speaking with Joe Molloy last night. That is all part of our look back at some of the big games in the Champions League, brought to you by Virgin Media Sport. Now, Anthony Moyles is with us this morning to talk to us about a bunch of different things. Anthony, we'd intended to talk to you a little bit about what you made of how everything is going right now, but obviously big news coming through from the GAA yesterday that there's going to be no activity, essentially, even training, until July, and we won't see any inter-county stuff until, if we see any at all this year, until October. What was your immediate response to this? And now that you've kind of had a few hours to think about it, what do you think of this?
I think it's probably sensible enough, Ger, in the sense of, they're probably biding themselves some time, with regard to, they don't want to be the first out the gap. They certainly don't want to be in a situation where they cancel things too early, and then, you have the likes of as you were talking about, the Bundesliga, or you have other various different, sports coming back, field sports coming back, over the next 3 to 4 weeks. I think it's really a buying of time for the next 4 to 6 weeks to see how kind of things progress. And, obviously, they're taking plenty of advice from the HSE, I would imagine. Of course they are. And really it's going to be dependent on that. The safety of the players, the safety of people around the players, be it family members, people within clubs, that's paramount. And you can argue both sides of it relative to the economy and everything else, but when you're an amateur sports person, you're not getting paid to do the job, and essentially that's what it boils down to. That is the difference between, say, some of the I suppose the pressure that is being applied on other sports, rather than what we have here in the GAA.
Yeah, the point is made in various places this morning that the pressure on the other sports is that they have massive outgoings in terms of they're paying players' salary, but they're not getting any return on that. They're not getting the sponsorship deals. They're not getting the TV rights unless those games actually do happen. So you can see in the GAA they do have expenses and running costs for their staff, but it's nowhere near the tens of millions that it would be for a Premier League club or a Bundesliga club, for example. The other thing that they've done is and I know Alan Milton has told John Duggan this morning, that they were concerned about video being taken of people breaching social distancing protocols. Now, if people breach social distancing protocols, they have cover. They've said, look, this isn't actually what we're telling players not to go training. We're telling players to do to abide by the rules. It's fair to say that with the guidelines that have been published, that you will see players joining each other at some point in June, having puck rounds and kick rounds, and nobody's going to bat an eyelid now, because we know that that's officially what you are allowed to do, but it's not on a GAA pitch and there's not somebody there blowing whistles. And actually, maybe that makes a bit of sense too.
Yeah, there's the question you ask and what you pose is probably a bigger thing with regard to insurance, and the whole aspect of insurance in lots of various different aspects of life, be it from business and businesses closing down, from different careers being just halted, on a whim, and then bang, we're just stopped, and people have just had to readjust. The GAA don't want to obviously be exposed, potentially exposed to something happening, and someone being able to retrace that back to a specific training session or a game that occurred or whatever it was, and some person lost their lives due to, the contracting of coronavirus. So it's a very sticky wicket for them, and it's a very sticky wicket for lots and lots and lots of different situations in different sectors and different businesses, obviously, but no more so than what they have. I think there's a lot of people. So there's two from what I can see, there's some people who are just looking for clarification and a lack of ambiguity, and kind of saying, listen, can you come out and just tell us whether it's going to be done for the year or not? You do feel for, say, managers, and especially inter-county managers who are trying to keep guys ticking over. You obviously feel for players. Guys just want to get out, and people just want to get back out in the pitch and puck balls or kick footballs, etc., etc. But that's kind of the same for every person in Joe Public. People want to get out and go for walks. People want to go out and do various things, visit their relations. So there has to be give and take in all aspects of life, and all sectors and all various walks of life at the moment. But so you have the clarification point. But also then you have the other side of it, which is obviously the health aspect. And the fact that they don't want to come out and be too early, as I just said, about shutting something down, and then kind of saying, well, actually, we could, if we waited 2 months, we probably could have got something in. Personally, I don't think there's going to be any. I don't think there's going to be anything happening this year. I think it's fanciful to think it will be. Maybe they would be better served just putting a line in it. And just saying no, it's done until next year, and just like let everyone get back to what they need to get back to. But I can't see it happening, Jared, to be honest.
I can see definitely why you and a lot of people do feel that way. The one thing that would give me a little bit of hope is how well Australia and New Zealand have managed and how quickly that scenario has changed. Now, obviously, they're completely different scenarios. They had a different approach to lockdown. They had a different governmental approach, and they've hit a point where they flattened the curve much quicker than anybody else has. If, for example, we were to begin to catch up relatively quickly, though, if in September we were where they are now in May, would you still feel the same at that point?
I think I would, Jared, because my major worry on this whole thing, and listen, I'm no medical or health expert or anything like it, but my major worry from what I see in my day job is that we potentially could be, in a situation where, like, this isn't going away, right? A vaccine, people are talking about a vaccine in 6 months. The fastest ever vaccine from pillar to post was done in 4 years. That's the fastest ever on record. So this is going to be, even with all the money and even with all of the vested interests throwing everything they can on it, I think it's going to be 2 years, if at all, right? So what way do they do it? Well, it's going to be about treatments, antiviral, various different treatments that will basically help you and try to get you back on the path if you do test positive for coronavirus. The big thing is obviously testing. And I think the big thing and the big failure at the moment, and kind of where we're going around scratching, I suppose, when you talk about Ireland versus Australia and New Zealand, it's resources. I don't really see, we spoke and there was various different iterations put out over the last 4 or 5 weeks that we'd be doing 100,000 tests a week, or we'd be doing this, or we'd be doing that, and we're going to check for antibodies in people. None of that has really occurred. Like, I know personally people who went for tests, who went to their GPs early on in this stuff and were told, well, listen, actually, the GP said, yes, I think you should go for a test. And then the criteria changed. And those people are still kind of scratching their heads going, well, have I recovered from it? Did I have it? Did I pass it on to someone? Have I any antibodies built up? Can I go back out into public? So there's still so many different questions. We still don't know whether you can get it again if you did have it. And, we talk about, say, you and I would be big NFL fans. Like, the NFL are really trying to push to try to get it back on. But that's a completely different scenario. They'll probably test guys maybe once or twice a week, which is basically what you have to do. Like, I mean, there's no point just testing you once and saying, okay, you're great, because you could get it literally 2 hours later from someone. So I think my worry would be come November, come flu season, later on this year, that we have a reoccurrence of this, and that the coronavirus basically, that it just stays in the system and it stays knocking around. And although, kind of heat and it has been shown that, UV rays, et cetera, it does help to reduce it in the open air and all those different things, but that it comes back and you have damp again and you have people living indoors again and it's getting dark and it's getting short days and all that stuff, and the flu season kicks in, and with it a rise of this happens, and actually perversely we end up opening things back up when we're actually coming into the most vulnerable time of the year, shall we say. So it's a worry. I think, like, my personal wish is that, we start to try to get ahead of this rather than reacting to this thing, that, anyone in government or anyone in any kind of sense of authority, that instead of reacting, and I think they are, I think the health people are trying to get ahead of it. The first major thing was, let's get into a situation where we have enough ICU beds that we're not overwhelmed. I think we've got to that point. As they start to unlock, there's no doubt in my mind that the cases are going to spike. It is going to happen. And I think people should be told that look, this will happen, this will occur. We know that there's a very vulnerable category, and those people unfortunately may have to cocoon for 12 months. They may just have to be literally, put into a situation where they're taken out of harm's way. And that's not to be callous or cold about it. But the flip side is that the likes of our age group, shall we say, who are out in the workforce, we can't be allowed then just to kind of stay at home and the economy just be shut down. Because if that happens, you'll end up coming back out of it in 12 or 14 months, and you will have a myriad of more problems. In other words, you could potentially looking into an economic depression, never mind a recession, out of all of this. And that's the real challenge that's kind of overhanging governments and officials with how to actually manage this situation, because there's the worry of it coming back. There's the worry about all of the different reoccurrence, and then obviously there's the fallout of what occur, and obviously there's the worry, which is of course there, which is of the potential death rate, etc., that happens. So it's a tough situation, Ger. There's no doubt about it, and I think we're in a hope phase at the moment. I think we really are. I think there's a lot of hope out there. I hope that hope is 100% correct, and I really do think that a vaccine, if it was to come great and early, it would be amazing. It would be fantastic. But looking at reality and looking at science and looking at all the data that has been out there for all the certain different things that have happened over the last 150 years with regards to any pandemic, and advancements in medical science, and listening to those people, a vaccine and something like that, which is going to be a panacea for all of this, I really can't see it happening for a long time, if at all.
Yeah, so we've got to learn to live with it is essentially what you're talking about, and how that society looks is something that we should all be talking about now, because if the economy is completely screwed, then that society is going to be very difficult for us to manage, to live in, all the issues that come with the word depression. We should be talking about that, because I think, you don't want to worry people, but it's hard not to be worried. That anxiety about what everybody's jobs are going to look like, what the economy is going to look like, and what our kids' future is going to be in this country. And traditionally we haven't dealt very well with bad times economically without sending a bunch of people to live in Australia or England or America or the rest of Europe. That's not going to be an option this time, because none of those countries are going to want to take people from us, and nobody's going to want to go there because they don't have any jobs either. So how do we avoid a depression?
How long have we got for that one? You don't want it. This is we're 10 to 9 in the morning. We don't want people kind of going and getting too worried about things. But in my day job, part of it, large part of it is obviously analysing risks that may occur, and we tend to look 6 to 12 months ahead. The stock market, for example, and different things have kind of rallied really hard because of all of the money that has been pumped into the system over the last 4 to 5 weeks, which is, some people will sit on one part of that argument and say, you need to let free markets happen, where others will say, no, you need to do this because you need to save companies and you need to kind of kickstart economies. There's a lot of worries about, well, what is the moral hazard of that down the line in 2 years' time or 3 years' time or whatever it is. But, my kind of feeling is, well, we'll face that when we face it. I think everyone has to deal with the reality of what's happening at the moment. And to your point, I think we're going to just have to learn to really live with this. We are going to have to let large parts of the society to get back out there and work. Because, as I say, if we do not, you can't rely on stimulus all the way. There's plenty of talk about Bewley's in the papers yesterday and today. They are certainly not going to be the only company that's going to be boarded up. I drove through the city this morning, Dublin, and it's depressing. And there's going to be loads of places boarded up even when we come out of this. And the landscape is going to be very different. The landscape of business is going to be very different. I was thinking about you guys, the way you guys did, even this show, and how it's a massive move away from radio. I don't think you had coronavirus in mind when you did it. Of course you didn't. But technological advancements, how people consume lots of things, from not only food and drink, but how they consume their entertainment, how they consume their sport. I heard Owen there talking about, if you got a package together, there's no doubt in my mind that virtual reality is going to come into play in the next number of years, that you'll be sitting in your sitting room, and if you wanted to watch Real Madrid versus Barcelona, you will literally, be able to enjoy that as a fan, literally like you were sitting in the Bernabeu. You will be able to have all of the atmosphere around you. You'll be sitting there drinking your favorite beer or having a cup of coffee, whatever you want to do. If you want to enjoy music, you'll be at a concert, wherever it is, but it'll be virtually streamed into your sitting room. All of these things, there's going to be pros and cons of this. Some businesses are going to absolutely fly it because of this thing, but some businesses are going to fail. And in most seismic changes, and unfortunately in most recessions/depressions, what happens is there's a seismic shift in something to do with industry. I think this began in 2008, 2009. I think it was saved because it got quite scary, and I think the policymakers saved it. But I think the remnants of it have remained, and I think the coronavirus was a tipping point. And I think things are going to change. Industry is going to change. Are you going to have 400 people sitting in an office on Stephen's Green anymore? Maybe not. You might only have 50 to 100, and 200 people will be working from home. Is education going to change? Are people going to be sending their kids to school if this coronavirus lasts for the next 4 to 5 years, or will you have much more tutorage at home? There's lots and lots and lots of different things, Ger, but I think we have to really start to think about, well, how are we going to live with this? If I get sick tomorrow, or if I feel symptoms coming on, I have to be able to say, right, bang, I'm self-isolating, I'm going home, I'm cocooning, I ring the powers that be, I try to get a test, and if it gets really bad, I go into hospital. But if I'm okay in 2 or 4 weeks' time, I come back out and I come back to work. And I think that's unfortunately, or fortunately, the way it's going to have to be. We're going to have, because I really don't think this is going away anytime soon.
And when it comes to, there's no question about it, it's going to spark some sort of innovation, whether it's by necessity and we look back and saying, well, we had to adapt, or we might look back at it and say, well, that was at least one silver lining we could take from this situation. But when you think about the innovations, and you mentioned the potential sports entertainment innovations that could happen over the next couple of months, it's hard to see what the sustainable innovation is to allow sport to get back to a place where it's earning the same amount of money, because it is human beings through a turnstile crammed together like sardines in a tin, which accelerates so much of the sports body's growth and income. It's hard to see any sort of replication for that.
Well, I think you still have that own. It may be just very, very different. It might be just the same as getting on a flight in the next 2 or 3 years. You will be tested as you go into the airport. You may have a temperature test. You may have to arrive to the airport with a note or something on your phone from your GP to say that you have, you're not positive for coronavirus. There will be longer lead-in times to get a flight. It might be 4 hours that you have to get to an airport rather than 2 hours prior to a flight, or a half an hour for some people. So, things, everyone will have to adapt. There will be a little bit of give and take on all of this. Requirements for masks may be that it's just mandatory. We just become. I was talking to a guy, who was over at the World Cup last year in Japan, and he says, when he reflects on it now, he says it's amazing to see how much they social distance in just everything they do. The wearing of masks is not looked down upon. It's pretty much taken as a matter of fact. There's no handshaking. There's actually a distancing even when they're sitting in cafes or whatever it is, and that's probably the way it's going to go. Why do they do that? Because they're used to this stuff. They've had SARS, they've had MERS, they've had bird flu, they've had it all. They understand what's required to kind of shut these things down and try to live with them. We're not. We just all thought that this is just something else that happens somewhere else and it won't get here. Well, it has got here now, and we have to adapt. And that means that everyone has to adapt, from the person who's producing from the producer to the supplier to the consumer, all the way down that chain, whether you're producing an entertainment show or sport, or whether you're producing a widget in business. Everything has to adapt, and everyone has to probably, over the next 6 to 9 months, everyone probably has to take a bit of pain, and everyone has to share the pain. I'm not sure that will happen, unfortunately, but it would be great if they did. But from a sports situation, I think that's what you're going to find. And I think the big thing, Owen, is, you know, I think you may find that actually, and this is always the way. There's always a number of ways of developing revenue. And if, you know, we're producing a show which is the Premier League, think of the audiences that you may be able to touch that you were never able to touch because you actually enhance the product. It's not just watching it with Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville, that you have all of those different things that you mentioned where you're actually, it's more of this fandom thing where you're, you know, maybe being brought down by a player into the tunnel, you know, by VR, you're meeting other players, you're down in the actual dressing room. There's so many things they could do. There really are. There's so many things. And I know there's companies now at the moment in the States, quoted companies, big companies, who are looking at trying to tie everything in together in the sense of, you know, through your Facebook or through whatever you use, your Instagram, you know, they'll know that Ger is into certain types of music or certain types of sport, and they'll be not flooding him with information, but they'll be trying to entice him in to watch this thing here or that thing there. And you'll be getting much more selective advertising, much more specific to you, which will then make you enjoy the product and tap into that a lot more. And I think technology is really going to make advancements here. I think it's been slow enough to get going. Of course, there's been major technological advancements, but I think it's going to take another massive leap forward, and I think it's going to be, you know, it's going to be in every single person, no matter what age you are. I think people are going to grasp it. Like, there's people out there at the moment who would never have shopped online, ever. They would never have thought about it. And those people have shopped online over the last 4 to 5 weeks, and they've realized two things. One, they can do it. And secondly, actually, it's really easy to do it. And it's pretty efficient. So will they go down to their, you know, local shopping center and potter around for 3 or 4 times a week? Or will they just shop online and maybe only go down once a week? Probably.
Yeah, it's going to have a transformative impact on on so many aspects of our lives, and we're only beginning to think that through. Fingers crossed, we're in that hope cycle where that is not catastrophic for the next generation and for us and for everybody else. That actually somehow this can be a V-shaped thing. Like I don't see any credible analysis just yet from too many places going, oh, this is okay. The rebound is going to be very quick. So. I don't know, are you hopeful that things will actually be handled in such a way that the recovery can be relatively quick?
Yeah, I didn't answer that for you, an apology, but I think I'm an optimist, even though I probably don't sound it, but I am, and you know, I think human nature, people don't want to wallow in misery, you know, but cycles and economic cycles, you know, when you go into your economics class in first year in college, you learn about your different cycles. You learn about your depressions and your recessions and your recoveries and and unfortunately, over the last number of years, probably 10 or 15 years, policymakers and vested interests have tried to interject on those points along the way. And 08 and 09, even though it was pretty catastrophic, it could have been a lot worse. And some people would feel it should have been a lot worse because it would have really, I suppose, healed the system of a lot of excesses, right? Now, we can go back into all the bailouts and we know all of those different things. Certain people were saved and da-da-da-da. We're basically right back into the same situation again. So no more than the airline business in America. You know, Boeing and a number of other companies were doing massive share buybacks, not to get too businessy about this, but they were spending billions of money all the way through to the end of December, buying back their own shares because they basically had nothing else to do with the money. And then lo and behold, 2 months later, they're looking at the government to bail them out because now they're saying, well, we have no money. So some people are saying, well, if you had kept the money that you just wasted on your own shares at a really high price, you now could have had money. So that's a kind of that's symptomatic of an awful lot of things, i.e. saving for the rainy day. Governments, corporates, even households have to do it. And that's why people would say, well, you know, why can't we do it when you know, from a government situation? Because always when there's money, the people saying, oh, you got to spend it. You got to get new roads. We got to get this. We got to get stadiums. We got to get different things built. And it's a very sticky wicket. Most politicians are only in for a short term and they want to go out, you know, kind of on their shield. So they'll do what the public wants. Unfortunately, my worry is that this whole situation could, and I mean could, it could really put us into a pretty drastic. Okay, let me phrase it this way. I think we're going to really bounce and be okay out of this short term, because the policy response will be very hard. I think there's been an awful lot of money thrown at it, and I think everything will seem like it's back okay, as long as, that we get the treatments. I don't think we'll get a vaccine. If we get a vaccine, absolutely brilliant. But as long as the treatments can get a handle on it, and things will recover. But my worry will be that there will be, and I can guarantee you this, there will be a bill to pay. Pascal Donoghue already mentioned it yesterday, and that bill will have to be paid with more taxes, more austerity, etc., etc. The landscape will change, as you mentioned. Pubs, restaurants, various different things will change. So there could be a massive unemployment situation with regard to the young, people 20 to 25 to 30 years of age. And these people might get a real pain in their arse, to be honest, because they've already come up through 08, 09. They've just thought that things are going to start. You've seen the way the election vote went the last while in the last election, because there was talk of, people not being able to get onto the housing market, people not able to get out from underneath their parents, people not able to do so. That swell of opinion will only grow if that youth unemployment increases. That causes a lot of social unrest, a lot of social upheaval. But fingers crossed, we can avoid that. And the major thing is that the austerity isn't too much, that people put on the jersey and say, okay, we need to do this, but if we do it for a certain amount of time, it's a credible plan and we will get out of this. And that's my big thing, Ger. I think planning and trying to get ahead and not treating people like fools. I think the general public in Ireland, and indeed around the world for the most part, if you lay out a plan as well as you can and you say, look, this is where we're trying to get to, and this is the reason why we're making these decisions. And that's the same as the GAA or whatever it is. This is the reason why we're making these decisions. And if we change now and do things, well, then we will get there and it will lessen the burden on everyone. And it may be a bit of a shock to people, but I think people would appreciate, okay, this is where we're going to go. Rather than coming out with glib statements of, oh, there's going to be a bill to pay, what does that mean? Everyone knows it's going to be, but does that mean that tax is going to go through the roof? Does that mean that we're going to have loads of austerity again?
Yeah.
They essentially don't know. So until you know, don't make statements like that. And it kind of goes back to the GAA. Like, I would be taking this opportunity if I was in the auspices of the GAA. This is a time to get ahead of things in the GAA. This is a time to say, okay, we've had major issues over the fixture list. We've had major issues over the calendar for the last number of years. Now the calendar has basically been suspended, right, through no fault of their own. But how can we come out of this, just as we were talking about businesses, how can we emerge out of this a different association? How can we get ahead of this and actually come and become a completely different association that serves everyone really well, that is fit for purpose, that doesn't go on for basically 12 months a year, that is much more confined, much more as a product, to go back to Owen's point, that people want to watch it, whether you go to the games or not. It can be really marketed, it can be really pushed, and it can be enjoyable, and it doesn't have to take up, as I say, all year around to play, whether you're an inter-county or a club player. So, there's lots and lots and lots of things that I think, and I think the people who will adapt well and the people who will survive this, and I mean that in a general sense, are the people who now sit back and go, okay, how do I take stock of this, and how do I in every part of my business or even my own personal life, what's good and what can I shed and what can I change to move forward?
Yeah, don't miss the opportunity of a crisis. Anthony, great stuff this morning. Thanks a million for joining us.
No bother, lads. Cheers.
0879 180 180 is the number to WhatsApp if you've got some views or questions for us here on OTBAM this morning. We're going to take a quick break. We're back with a How's the Head, and we're also going to talk about what the referees are getting up to at the moment.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
The OTB Brief. Everything you need to know about sport every morning. Need to get on top of the day's sports news? Well, the OTB Brief is the only sports update you'll need every morning. With all the breaking stories, post-match reaction.
They had one more day to rest. We were really in trouble to build the team.
And the best bits from off the ball, all in a 10-minute podcast.
Oh, sweaty palms. Of course, you guys know what it's like, but that was nervy. Yeah.
The OTB Brief, online every morning from 7 a.m. on offtheball.com, the Go Loud app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
OTB AM.
All right, if you want to get in touch with us this morning, as ever, the number is the same, 0879 180 180, or you can use the hashtag OTBAM. A little bit later on, we're going to bring you the very first episode in a new slot that we're launching. It's Keith Wood's State of the Union, where we talk about the state of rugby union. That's coming your way at 10 o'clock, a specially extended show for you. But now we want to talk about a brilliant initiative that the GAA's 72-man national panel of Gaelic football and hurling referees are undertaking this weekend. They're going to run a cumulative total of 810 kilometres on Saturday to raise money for the suicide prevention and bereavement charity Pieta House. And I'm delighted to say Martin McNally is with us to talk to us about this. Martin, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
Morning, guys.
How much of the 810 kilometres are you actually running?
We're doing 11.2, and that's just not a figure that's plucked out of the sky. In the All-Ireland football final programmes last year, there was a piece in the back of it that was quite informative, produced by Aidan Brady, who is a DCU student who looks after all our strength and conditioning, our training, etc. And the 11.2 is the average of what every referee runs in a 70-minute game. So 72 of us are running 11.2, which is an accumulative number of 810. So that's the target this weekend on Saturday morning for everybody.
And do you take the full 70 minutes to run the 11 kilometres, or are you getting a bit faster now in lockdown?
No, well, look, it's, I suppose the 11.2 is a bit different for us because, during the course of a game, you're doing a lot of high-speed, short busts, and, the long, moderate runs isn't really something we do. And funny, I was talking to Dermot Malone from Monaghan. He was just sent me a text of support on it for the weekend, and he was saying, like the 5K would be the limit that he would go in long distance running. And I suppose as athletes in the GAA, footballers and referees, we're kind of designed and programmed to do the short, hard, fast running. And yes, it does clock up over the course of a game to, the 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever the case may be. But yeah, it's a bit different for us, so we've had to, Aidan Brady has given us some advice on how to make it easier for us over the next over Saturday. But over the last couple of weeks, we've kind of been changing our training towards it,
Right. Can I ask Martin, over the course of 80 minutes of an inter-county game, unbelievable high intensity in a big pitch like Croke Park, for example, like how shattered would you be come the end? Is it akin to a player where you're like, you could actually be struggling in certain high octane games?
Yeah, well, there's a mix of two things in a game, I suppose. Number one, you have the physical demand of the game. It could be a very open game up and down the field, and the two teams leave your job very, very easy. In the sense that they both want to play football. And that's a different type of shattered. You're physically exhausted, and then there's the other games that are maybe not as high tempo but are very intense and challenge a lot of the mind. You have to have your wits about you, you're quite busy in other ways, and you really come off the field, I suppose, physically but very mentally shattered in them type of games. So it's a bit of both. It depends what type of game you get, but definitely after a game, you definitely were very much like the inter-county players. Like there's some inter-county players, in certain positions of the field that may only cover 3, 4, 5 kilometres in a game, whilst we're averaging, the 11.3, which is quite a high number. So it does demand, us to be quite disciplined in what we do pre and post match, and after the game you definitely would be not doing anything. Like the next 3, 4, 5 days after that is definitely recovery sessions. But like I said, you have the two I suppose type of games where one can actually leave you totally mentally shattered.
So it obviously makes a difference what sort of game it is in terms of how you feel physically. Like I think David Goff was saying previously that he would really have no idea how a game is going or I can't remember if he said who was winning, but certainly how the game is going, like what sort of game it is, if it's a good game or not. Can you almost tell how high quality a game is given how shattered you are at some points in the middle of a game?
You can definitely know the type of game that you're in, with regard to the quality and the intensity and all them kind of things. But if we were to be asked after the game, who did you think man of the match was or any of that kind of stuff, all that stuff goes out the window because, we are refereeing jerseys and we're going, moment by moment, decision by decision. And, it's kind of broken down into them kind of things. And, people ask you after the game, who did you think man of the match was? And I haven't got a clue, you're just not watching the game in that way. And, that's likewise for your linesmen and your umpires and that. And people wouldn't believe you, but you're just actually switched on because, I've even spoken, we've been speaking in the car on the way home, the umpires and that. And, we're talking about different performances. Guys wouldn't know what happened or wouldn't have noticed it because they were watching their quarter of the field or they were doing their particular job on the day,
The bit where you get shouted at RF, will you let it flow? I mean, you must have watched games before in the past and seen the ebb and flow of matches and how a different style of refereeing influences things. Presumably when you're in the middle of a game, you've no clue about that. But is this something that you ever think about kind of retrospectively and go back and watch a game and go, could I have done something differently here? Would I have made changes to that? How do you feel about the role that the ref plays and the ultimate quality of the match?
Yeah, I suppose the big thing for us is that, we are there to, I suppose, referee the game, and that is rule by rule, sequence by sequence, etc., etc. And I suppose, over a period of time, teams become accustomed to a referee and their style of refereeing, no different than a referee becomes accustomed to a team style of play, etc., etc. And I suppose maybe, down the line when them things marry up, sometimes you end up having something, especially when you have two things that are very compatible. You have, I suppose, a game that turns into be a very good spectacle for everybody. But you can't really judge a game or preempt anything because you could have the best will in the world to do X, Y, and Z before you throw the ball in, but the minute you throw the ball in and something changes, the course of the game is going down a totally different road altogether.
Yes, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. It's the Mike Tyson quote.
Yeah, like I've been part of teams, with my own club and stuff like that, and you go out and all of a sudden you lose your best forward to an injury, and next thing everybody, the heads drop and all that kind of stuff. So all them things come into play, let it be, a team of officials maybe making a mistake or a player, getting injured on a team or the star player getting sent off, whatever the case may be. So you can preempt all these things and people say, yeah, this has the potential to be a real good game. And, the script goes out the window as soon as you throw the ball in and something like that happens.
They do this good thing, I think it might have been the Telegraph, and I don't want to get it wrong, but where they go back and they referee the Chelsea Leeds FA Cup final. They did it 20 years ago, they got David Ellery to do it, and they did it again recently, and it went from there would have been 4 red cards when David Ellery did it to 11 or 12 the last time. We've been doing some classic game club over the course of lock-in, and the Tyrone-Kerry game from 2005 had some fairly meaty challenges, elbows to the head that are waved on, or maybe a booking. Has the game changed that much, do you think, in your view, as somebody who kind of grew up watching it? And if you ever watch any of those games back, you're like, well, it's a little bit fruity, that challenge.
Yeah, we meet on a regular basis for seminars, and yes, we do go back on a lot of games, in the archives, to just to learn from them, to keep ourselves refreshed, different even technical incidents, I suppose the famous one is the Louthmead square ball. So we are constantly reminded and constantly watching back in our games, and there's no bigger critic than ourselves when it comes to reviewing games, because ultimately it's a reward driven game, no different than a player having a good performance. If we have a good performance as a referee, the potential for us to get the next biggest game or the next biggest appointment or a final or whatever the case may be comes on the back of delivering good performances, so we are definitely very much like that, and there's nobody better at scrutinizing ourselves than ourselves, because we just demand them standards of each other. And it's very hard for people to understand this. Like, we are a team when we go out, and the performance of our team, as in the linesmen and the umpires around us, we really, really rely on them in order to get us across the line and delivering that good performance on the day, because you're relying on your umpires maybe to pick something up off the ball, or make a really good Hawkeye decision, or whatever the case may be, and it's all performance pending, our job.
In terms of your own training at the moment, obviously the news kind of came through yesterday that we don't expect any intercounty before October. Is that in line kind of with what you guys had been told, or is that your expectation too, that there won't be any significant time on the field refereeing matches probably until September in club?
Yeah, we had a meeting last week, and that's what we were told that was potentially coming down the line. Nothing was fully confirmed, but that's what the lie of the land looked like at that stage, and personally, I think they're doing a really good job and giving everybody the time to do what they need to do. We have training plans and structures, and we've always been training on our own, so nothing really changes there, But yeah, down the line, it looks more or less the same as what the announcement was yesterday, pending that everything goes the way we're expecting it to go, that we're going to have club football first, followed by a potential inter-county season at the end of the year.
Martin, how do you feel about refereeing a game in terms of your own health and safety at the moment, or before the end of the year?
I honestly would have no issue, because the GA and all the sporting bodies, we'd be naive to think that if the GA aren't in liaison with the IRFU or the FAI or any of them sporting bodies, I know the GA gets it in the neck a lot because they're the grassroots and they're part of every community, and they're the sport that everybody wants to talk about immediately. But I would be quite comfortable, because they're not going to put anybody at risk. You could have a person who has an underlying health condition that everybody is aware of, and then you could have somebody else who has an underlying health condition that nobody knows of, even the person themselves don't know about it. And they're, them two people are equally as much at risk going out in a game if the potential was there to contact coronavirus. But I would be safe, because nothing is going to happen unless the GA are happy that the health authorities and the government has given them the green light. And it's just not the GA. As I said, we'd be quite naive to think that the GA aren't liaison with the IRFU, the FAI, and plus, along with this, like everything that has happened so far, we've had the benefit of seeing what happened in China. We've the benefit of seeing what happened in Italy. And, more than likely, the sporting bodies in Ireland are going to have the benefit of seeing what happens in other European countries with regard to sports. And we're probably going to learn a bit from that, as to what we can do, what we can implement, and how we can make it safe for everybody going forward.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Martin, thanks a million for joining us this morning, and best of luck with your 11.2k.
Cheers, guys, and feel free to donate on our GoFundMe page. Definitely.
So it's GoFundMe if you want to know about the referees running for Pieta House this weekend. The entire intercounty panel of referees are doing it on Saturday, and we wish them all the best of luck for that. It's for a great cause. Now, How's the Head is a series that we've been running across Off the Ball over the last few weeks, checking in with athletes around the country to hear how they're getting on. We'd like to hear how you're doing. You can WhatsApp us 0879 180 180 or use the hashtag How's the Head. Yesterday, Will O'Callaghan caught up with the Laois defender Eric Killeen, who is now the GPA FIFA 20 All-Ireland champion.
Every player, their stats were reduced, so every right back on the team was the very same as everyone else's right back. Everyone's strikers were the same as everyone's strikers. So you'd have Aguero from Man City, who I had, was the very same as Spartak Moscow's striker, or the smaller clubs in the Champions League, basically. So everyone was kind of equal, but it helped, being Man City, Manchester City, because I play with them sometimes. It got put into the group chat, and when Mark Kavanagh said, Eric Lean, this is your job, this is what you've been waiting for. So I just texted in saying, I've been training all year for this, and they just said, Eric, we'll let you go forward first. So that's how I got picked, really, from the Laois side. I'm after hanging up my FIFA career now, so I'm not playing anyone since I had the title, so I'm going to keep it as that. But there's a few good ones in there, all right, yeah. I think there was 4 or 5 games, I think it was, to win the title. But no, I was shocking nervous now. I think I had Bayern Munich first, and he won that 2-1, last-minute header, so I was going mad in the sitting room, so I was when I went in. I went 2-0 down, and then I got one back, and then he scored straight away, and I put my head down for a second, and I said, you better cop on now, because I wasn't really concentrating. I was kind of thinking the whole time about stuff, and I was playing lads in the morning. They were beating me as well, and I'd come back and I'd draw against them at the last minute. So I was like, I think if I just concentrate, I could snake a few back, get a bit of momentum behind me. So I got it, thank God. I was sitting forward before the game. I was sitting forward making my team, let alone when the game started. I was always, but yeah, definitely when I went 3-1 down, I kind of shrugged my shoulders a small bit and started nodding my head and started concentrating now. So I was sitting forward all right, yeah. I kind of work off defence more, so I love kind of defending. That's what they said. They're like, I had a very good defence record. I know in the final I conceded 4 goals, but up to that I was kind of like, I always kind of hold back and let them work it out, or let them work it to me, and kind of just sit back and wait for the touch kind of. But I do possession and kind of pass it in the wing and then pass it back into the middle and try and do a 1-2 or something, so I'd be getting behind the defenders. There's one, I think, if you shoot on the near post, if you're running in, it more likely go in now. So I did that. I think I did that in, I scored 2 of them like that. I think I scored my 4th goal with Aguero at the 85th minute. I scored that near post, just a bare any power, and it'll go in. So I kind of had that one studied before I started the tournament. I was kind of after, I couldn't believe it. I was just running around the house, and my mother and father were outside. I told them not to go on the internet or nothing, so I ran out to the backyard and said, I'm after winning. I was screaming and shouting, and so they were telling me to relax a small bit. I was too busy going mental on the headset. All the boys then after, mine would be very poor now. I wouldn't have a camera. I barely have a headset now, so I think I'm after winning a chair and a headset from this tournament. So that'll have me set up quite nice now. So to be honest now, I said it to the lads. We were kind of in a group chat talking on the headsets to each other before the matches, all the creators. And I said it to them, I've been more nervous. This is more nervous now than a club county final nearly. I'd be shaking, I'd feel cold, I'd be warm. I had the very same feeling for the county finals, so it's an experience, so we're all doing our own thing, kind of. It's boring, but we just have to stick inside and just listen to the rules and just follow them as much as we can, more so than anything else. We have an app, and we send in what we're doing ourselves, and we've 1 kilometre tests, and we post them in as well. And we gave us, at the very start of all this, we got our own different types of running, different stages to build up to prepare ourselves for a championship. So kind of we're slowly going up the ladder, basically, so we can be full fit until we turn back. We don't know what's the story. I don't know if the club is going ahead. We could even go towards that first. I doubt it, though. I think championship would be in October, so we're all dying down a small bit, but we're trying to keep on top of things as well. You get a bit of momentum if the crowd was behind you. If you got a score, or if you got a hook or a block, and the crowd roaring, that could nearly jeer you on for another point or another score again. So it'd be weird if it was behind closed. It'd be all for it, yeah, just to go back out and play. But it'd be a weird experience. It'd be like a training session. We were kind of preparing just to be at our best, and now this is kind of setting us back a small bit, as you said. Yeah, it's kind of very frustrating for all of us. We just want to play and kind of just see what we can do this year. Training all to start before the league, getting ready to go, and then kind of stopping. But if that has to be it, to get it right for next year, then we'll have to do it. I would be disappointed, yeah. Yeah, I've nearly gone through a lot of episodes on Netflix now, a lot of series, a lot of different things. I'm on to war, history, animal stuff, and sport. I'm kind of watching everything, so I am. Yeah, as you can see, it's kind of orangey yellow, sort of nearly a tacky colour, sort of. It didn't fully go blonde for me, but we all decided we're all going to shave or dye our hairs for the Do It For Dan organisation, and I went with dye. A few of the club lads, we all went with dye, and only a few went with shave.
Yeah, good stuff. As happy as you've seen any of the Laois hurlers I suppose last year they had a sensational wins. So, have you decided if you're going to shave or dye, Owen? If you had to, which would you do?
Oh, good question. I don't know. I haven't touched the head of hair just yet. So,
what are your long-term plans here? I mean, obviously there's been.
Yeah. Good question. Like something's got to give, and it's. I don't know. There might have to be an amateur job done on that pretty soon, I think.
Do you trust somebody in the house that you're on lockdown with to do it, or do you take the guy who sheared his head with the sheep shears approach?
Could do that actually. I might need to go down to Kerry to get a kind of a pair of sheep shears. But you're kind of looking longingly at is it Spain opening hairdressers and barbers this week? You're like, that would be an interesting thing if we did something like that here. So something's going to happen. Something is going to happen eventually. Unless I just become someone, I don't know, just start rocking the Chris Waddle from 1990 mullet before the end of the summer. That could be the other option.
It's £200 apparently on the black market at the moment to get your hair done.
And what happens then? Does somebody pick you up? Do you get dropped back off? What's?
Oh no, I presume they come to your house and do it in your house. No, is that not the?
Yeah, no, I just find hairdressing on the black market quite a comical idea.
They just stick a mask on, I mean, wear gloves. What could possibly go wrong with this? Where somebody goes from house to house to house to house to house with nice hot scenario of,
Well, I just kind of have it in my mind, something like the corner in Baltimore in The Wire, where one barber's pager goes off, he kind of nods to another pager up the street, and then the person who wants to get their hair cut is smuggled in a van up the road, brought into a safe house where they can get their hair cut, and then they're brought out a back exit and put back into this unmarked van again and brought back off to their home and dumped in an alley somewhere.
Looking good, That's
looking fly, so it's all worth it.
But if you did have to shave or dye, which would you do?
Shave.
Would you? Would you not like to see what you look like with a different colour?
No.
Why not?
I guess I kind of would actually. Interesting. It's to see what actually kind of happens. I think I've kind of I've nailed my colours to the mast very much when it comes to my hair colour at this point. It would just be an absurd change to. I don't know. I don't know is the answer. What about you? What would you do?
Oh, I'd totally dye it. Absolutely. Want to see what it looks like.
Oh, just out of curiosity. Is shaving not something that you could get back to your current level with quicker than dyeing?
But I mean, why do I want to go back to my current level? This is our opportunity to try loads of new things and blame it on I did that thing because of the coronavirus. What? Has completely nothing to do with the coronavirus.
Is that what Anthony Moyles was actually talking about earlier on when he said
become your real person. Yeah, become who you are. Self-actualize to a point where you're no longer worried about societal conventions. If you want to walk around doing whatever it is if you want to channel your inner Dennis Rodman, I think is essentially what we should all be doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Who's going to be the Madonna that awakens the Dennis Rodman inside all of us, though, is the question. Are we going to find ourselves during coronavirus lockdown? Now, that would certainly be something that would be good. We don't need to I don't know, go traveling or something. We can just sit in our room and shave our heads, and we find the real us.
Yeah, it was interesting listening to Anthony Moyles earlier on talking about what the future of sports spectator might look like, and gig going and all that kind of stuff. VR is already there. You could see if the Premier League allowed it, where a VR company supplies the fan experience of each of the teams in the Premier League, replicating as much as they can with previous matches. That might be a fairly good experience, sitting on your couch being in the Bernabeu, sitting on your couch being in Villa Park. And that might be the next level of this, where actually, you pay an extra tenner or 15 quid or 50 quid to go to that game.
Yeah, it is definitely the next level, isn't it? It's just been something that hasn't been nailed yet when it comes to technology. I don't know what it is. Is it maybe to do with the fact that you look slightly ridiculous when you're engaging in virtual reality? Maybe, but I wouldn't have thought it's too much of an issue if you're locked in your house. It doesn't really matter how you look, given we've just literally had a conversation realistically about bleaching both of our heads. I don't it just seems to have been a bit of technology that's been spoken about for quite some time. and it just hasn't got to the point where consumers are willing to shell out whatever money it is to actually have the worthwhile experience.
Yeah, look, it's coming. Let's move on. We want to talk a little bit of rugby. I'm delighted that we got Johnny Murphy with us. Johnny, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
Morning, guys. How's all with you? Yeah, all
good. You also are doing a run this weekend. What's the details of your run?
We've a big rugby run. We have about we've got about over 1,500 people participating. We've raised probably in around 17 grand, and we're going to cover a distance of hopefully over 5,000 kilometres. So it's across rugby league, rugby union, kids, players. So there's 3 past player teams from Munster, 1 from Leinster, 1 from Connacht. I have a team in it, so up front it's all in aid of Feed the Heroes for feeding frontline staff. So I have 2 Irish internationals, female internationals, Linda Dejujon and Claire Fitzpatrick. I also have Billy Holland and Tom Gleeson, who have, well, Billy obviously with his story has kind of sampled exactly what the frontline staff workers do, and all the other 3 are fighting on the front line at the moment. So it's a good cause. We've been obviously pretty quiet with the academy, so we decided to turn our attention to doing something like this, and it's kind of taken off, which is great.
How far are you running?
I'm running 10.5k.
Right.
It's the furthest I've ever run. So I did 8k at the start of this week, and I have a newfound respect for anyone that consistently runs 5ks or anything past that. It's a bit of a mental dredge. I'm still carrying a bit of extra timber, so that doesn't particularly help when you get past 5k.
It's hard on lockdown not to be carrying a little bit of extra timber, it turns out.
Yeah, I would agree.
Come here, obviously you were part of a coaching ticket that had delivered great success at schools level, and we're looking forward to a historic Schools Cup final. That's gone. Is it totally gone, or is it prospect of it happening next year? What is the actual scenario with that?
It was kind of a wait and see, really. But I'd say, given everything that's going on, the likelihood is that it's done. So it's going to be shared. But I think for the 6 years specifically, I think there's a whole lot of uncertainty around the more important part of their 6-year journey in terms of the leaving cert. So it's just to try and get some clarity on that for them first, and then see where we sit. But it is more or less over, I would say, for us, unfortunately. But look, there's bigger things at stake now in society, so we just have to. I was big on the kind of, better people, better players stuff throughout the season. So, and the fact that rugby gives them tools to deal with stuff in real life, and they probably have to, they have to use those tools now to deal with everything that's going on in their lives.
Are you still in contact with them? Are you talking to many of them about what is happening with the leaving cert and the level of anxiety they have about not knowing what the plan is?
I'd be in good bit of contact with Marcus Kiley, who'd be our captain, and he's a pretty level-headed guy, so he's fine. But there is a certain amount of anxiety across the board, and they just don't really know what to do. I've been lucky that my 6-year group would be a very intelligent group of young men, so they kind of get the responsibility attached to them, but they also. There's probably more guys going for academic scholarships in college than there are for athletic scholarships. So the exams would be a big part of. A lot of them want to do it because they feel they can kind of, like, the mocks were in the middle of the cup campaign. So, if they do go predictive things, probably not a lot of lads would have been in a good spot then, So it's difficult. It really is difficult for them. But, hopefully there's a resolution soon. There's talk of that over the last couple of days, but I think they certainly deserve that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think anybody involved in education, anybody knows anybody who's teaching leaving certs or has leaving certs in the house understands exactly the level of anxiety that it's causing, because it's like the not knowing is almost worse than the knowing. If they just make a decision and stick to it, then everybody goes, okay, well, that's the decision made. But it is and in many ways that kind of the lack of a plan exist in all aspects of sport that we're talking about. I know obviously you've got a very keen interest in racing, and we're quite keen to see when that decision is going to be made, and obviously people are working away in the background to try and get the government to come down exactly on one side or the other. Is this agriculture? Is it, I mean, it's 100% is agriculture, and so therefore they could not follow on the same path as all of the other sports are. But I don't know if you've got any thoughts on what's going to happen with that and how the industry is going to be impacted.
Yeah, I think it's everything is just in a holding pattern, and it's very difficult for people to plan. You know, like we've 3 horses in a syndicate. One is literally yesterday just went to a pre-training yard on the hope that racing would be starting at the end of the month or in June. But we had to hold off on that because we don't really know where we're landing at the moment. We unfortunately, 2 of the 3 were ready to run the first weekend. We didn't get there. But I think there was a realization that was the right thing to do to cancel everything, and society needed to happen. So, but now things, you know, I think I was listening to Anthony earlier on, there is going to be a certain aspect of that. We have to kind of live with this now. We have to, a new normal, as everyone is talking about. So it's to find best practice ways of doing, you know, living your daily life, your job. And, you know, I think racing has done it before. So hopefully they get an opportunity to show that it can be done sooner rather than later. But I suppose the difference in racing is that horses need to be ridden out every single day. And because everyone needs staff, they can't furlough the staff. So it's the equivalent, I'm not sure whether it's a good analogy, but it's the equivalent of telling, you know, the vintners that they need to bring in all their staff. They need to pull the exact same amount of pints, but they can't sell any of them. And that's the reality of where the training yards are, the breeders are, the breeze up guys. No one knows what's happening because the racing is kind of the showcase, but it's only the top layer. There's a huge amount underneath that goes to it's a massive industry, and that's in a lot of worry at the moment. I think any trainer who has between 35 horses and down, if it is going to be the 29th of June or July is what people are potentially thinking, they're going to be under a lot of pressure, and that's going to mean a loss of more jobs.
Yeah, and that's where people begin to get very anxious about what's happening again. And like, I know obviously nothing can be done to jeopardise public health, but finding a way to live with the public health issues is kind of the next stage where all of our brain power needs to be focused. Now, in terms of the situation with regards to rugby, I don't know, like there's a very interesting piece today with Dana Falvey where he's talking about how he thinks that there might be rugby in New Zealand and Australia relatively soon. We're going to see the rugby league back in Australia first, and then very soon you'd expect to see rugby union back after that. So that's kind of green shoots of hope, and certainly World Rugby seem to be on top of exactly what the protocols would need to be to play. And he thinks that there will actually be matches, and potentially before spectators by the end of the year in Ireland. Certainly the interprovincials will be the ones that come back first. The sport is in a fairly precarious situation, it seems, with regards to its finances, and it's certainly expanded very rapidly. So it's going to be interesting to see how well they come through this, or what rugby looks like on the far side of it.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the thing. There's different reports that come out. I've seen the New Zealand return to play protocols. There's one that's just been published actually from the Swiss Rugby Union. It's a 5-stage protocol. So it's the New Zealand one is 4-stage. So it's going to be how we manage through. And I think everyone knows it's the close contact quarters that are the issue in rugby. But I think there is an acceptance that rugby behind closed doors or within what the government guidelines are on gatherings, public gatherings, that's just the way it's going to be. Whether that means that the amateur game or the club game, the schools game can go back to some way normal, because the crowds are generally very small at the majority of games, but it's an acceptance that professional sport is going to be behind closed doors for a longer period of time than people want, and that's ultimately what provides the money to fund the whole game. So it's very difficult for all the unions and World Rugby to plan financially when. And now, to be fair, Ireland they're in a better situation than a lot of people, than a lot of other unions. I was speaking to my friends over in England. English rugby is in a very dangerous position. Obviously the RFU came out with that article yesterday in terms of the money that they're going to lose, which is astronomical. But the independent clubs are also on their knees as well. There's 3 or 4 clubs that are going to struggle to keep the doors open if they don't return to playing. And, Newcastle have furloughed nearly all their staff. There was an article a couple of weeks ago, Dean Richards offered his services back to the police, given he was a police officer before he went into professional rugby. That's a problem. There's a huge amount of uncertainty for players as well. Their contracts are up at the end of within 2 months. There was a big article last week about some clubs that players weren't agreeing to pay cuts, but they had they don't have contracts from the 1st of July. So, they're taking a double hit and they don't know where they're going to end up. So there's just a huge amount of uncertainty around everything. But I think people want to get back to rugby, want to get back to training and playing. We have to follow the guidelines. And I think sooner we have a general pathway, the better, so people can start planning. It can't be a case of, right, lads, you can do full contact, let's play in 2 weeks' time. There has to be a build-up to that. And there has to be a build-up physically for your bodies to be able to deal with the physical demands of the game. In Ireland, it'd be great if there's a filter down to the club game. In the AIL, if travel's not allowed, the Interpros can go ahead and, having guys back in the clubs. I know Brendan Fanning did a piece a couple of weeks ago that was excellent on it, and he's a big advocate of the club game. I'm obviously a bit biased because my journey into professional rugby was through the club game, so it'd be great to see that if it was an opportunity. But it looks really like the only pathway, unless you run an extended interprovincial where it's home and away and they try and get 6, 7, 8, 10 games maybe out of it with semi-final and finals. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that would, it sounds like the type of thing a couple of years ago you'd be like, really, we're going to play that off and the whole country's going to watch. But, you can see now if November and December is interprovincials and then everybody qualifies for semi-finals.
Yeah.
It's like, we might take that. We're laughing now, but come November, December, it's the 5th time this week we're seeing Leinster versus Munster. Happy days.
But it's something to watch, I suppose, rather than all the reruns that are going around, which is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, for sure. Johnny, best of luck with the run this weekend. If anybody wants to donate, how do they get to it?
We have a GoFundMe page, and different clubs have different GoFundMe pages. So if you go on our GoFundMe page, just go to www.thebigrugby.run and you'll be able to follow all. There's still a few places left, so hopefully we can get to maybe 2,000 people running and try and get as close to over and past 20k for Feed the Heroes. It'd be brilliant.
That'd be great. Thanks a million. The Big Rugby Run, Johnny Murphy there giving us details of that. We wish him and everybody else doing that run the best of luck this weekend. Now, a reminder, we release up to 40 podcasts per week across the OTB podcast network. Some examples from this week. Joe Cole, the actor, on our OTB Culture Hall of Fame. Kevin Kilban and Leon Osman looking back at Everton's ill-fated Champions League campaign. All Blacks legend Sean Fitzpatrick joined Keith Wood on Wednesday Night Rugby. There's all 14 episodes of the Classic Game Club. Off the Bull, it's our podcast that looks back at each and every episode of The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary. Louth's Sporting Mount Rushmore with Ronan Mullen and Dan McDonnell was the most recent one. And then tomorrow morning, Tipperary's turn. Alan Quinlan and Michael Quinlivan are going to be doing the carving. Subscribe to highlights from OTB for all of that. And they are just some of the examples of the free content that you get here from us on OTB. 0879 180 180 is the number to get in touch with if you've got any questions for us on WhatsApp. That's the best way. Of course, you can always use the hashtag OTBAM, or if you need to, you can tweet us at Off the Ball. Now, let's move on. Our Off the Couch this week is Colm Nally, GA coach from Meath. Off the Couch is brought to you in association with Joint Ace. Joint Ace is packed with trace minerals, vitamins and nutrients to support a fit and healthy lifestyle at any age. Check out jointace.com for more. Colm, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
Hey, Jerry, how's things?
Yeah, good. We've obviously been very impressed with your analysis of the game in the past, and that comes from a long-standing coaching background. With the news that inter-county players are essentially being told to knock off the training for a couple of months, as a coach, what would your advice be to them at the moment?
Well, I found that statement strange because I don't know of any inter-county teams that are training. I know lads that are training individually, but they'd be doing that anyway. So what we have at the difference between county and club really is that you have more resources at county in terms of S&C and nutritionists and stuff like that. So what you'd have is a lot of players using them resources to find out some information that might give them a little bit of an edge in terms of getting their body ready for back into competition if that happens. That's the only training I see they're doing. Now, from our point of view, like the lockdown and COVID-19 has happened in various stages, and we've been communicating with the fellas. I've been sending them skilled videos and that to practice and, stuff like that. But everything is optional and there's no pressure on anybody to do anything. We'd have an odd Zoom call here or there, but it's mainly social. Because you have a duty of care to your teammates, and it's just really checking in on them because, it disaffects people in various different ways. Some people are isolating, some people are working, some people are front care workers. So, we have to it's nice to check in every now and again and see if they're really okay. Yeah, the mental side of this is going to be very difficult for people to come through if you don't have a support network. Just the whole point, though, about not forgetting the ball and making sure that it's your skills that you're working on as much as anything else. Like I know one of the things that people are talking about, now's the time to work on your speed, but it's also now's the time to work on your skills, right? Absolutely. Now, what you'd have now at the minute really is only what's called block practice, where you practice on your own. So, it's a good time for people to kind of find a new weapon, as I would say, like a dummy sole or a dummy hop or a bilateral one. So, we're giving them little skill sets of that. One of the things we did do with players is we asked them to video the space that they have to work with. And they sent them to me, and we designed a few practices. Like some fellas have fields, some fellas have small back gardens, some fellas have roads. So it's different. So we were trying to give them a few ideas, basically, that they can keep the ball in the hand, when they're out kicking about. We've got some of your coaching drills that we're going to put up today for us. So what have you got for us? What do you think people should be doing? Okay, like when the lads asked me to do this, I was saying, well, I'm not doing it because I'm too old. So what we've been doing basically is... these are young lads from the Blues football team here in Drogheda, and what we have done is we put a series of activities together from some of our players that we can give out to our younger players. Because, Jared, the thing about younger players is you have to connect with them, right, and you have to connect with their minds, and they're finding this very difficult. Now, they will probably struggle to watch other kids practicing, but they will watch the players that they know that's tangible practicing, and they can ask these lads questions. They'll meet them in the street, they'll meet them at the pitch when it reopens and stuff like that. So what we did is, the majority of the players that you're going to watch in this video have come through our system from 7 years of age. We've been with them, and they've gone on to win 3 senior championships. And they're kind of like big stars in this small environment. So they're very, very tangible to the club mates. So what we've done here is a few coaching points on some simple skills in small areas, and what we've done with them is we've got them out through the coaches to their teams. But the key here as well is the parents are getting a few key points to help the kids coach. So you got a little bit of interaction there as well. So that's what we were kind of aiming for. There's a field close to where we live where there are dads and parents, or dads and kids, and you can see different levels of coaching ability. Some of them are actually doing drills where the kids who are 10 or 12 are kicking the ball over from essentially 40 yards out, and it's unbelievably impressive. It's like 2 sisters and a brother, obviously, and the brother's the youngest, so he's the one who has to feed them the balls, and they're kicking points. You're like, wow, this is pretty amazing. So that's obviously a dad who knows exactly what he's doing. He's standing behind the goals. But for parents who don't really know what they're doing, but who would like to get their kids into some kind of like skill acquisition, as opposed to, to give them a little bit of focus, are there handy things that they can be trying to do? Well, obviously it'll come at different ages, right? So again, what like you have to remember too, right? Newtown Blues and Drogheda, right? Drogheda is one of the most urbanised towns outside of Dublin. We're a community-based organisation. So what we're doing is, right, we're trying to engage with everybody. You've got various different age groups. So you have nursery components, and then you've got the various stages. So their abilities are going to be different, but you won't do any harm with a ball in the hand, be it soloing or trying to solo, be it hopping, right? So I would be suggesting to most people, right, is even like you see a lot of people running around their greens in front, particularly if you're a GAA player, I'd be saying run around the green with your ball, soling it and bouncing it, you know, irrespective if you're soling it wrong or what. You know, you'd be trying to just say, point your toe forward, get the ball up to your hip height, that sort of stuff. But I mean, I wouldn't be going too hard if they're not getting it. But what happens is, right, is that connection comes if they keep practicing and practicing and practicing. And look, we've seen some of the most unusual solos out there, right? There's no right or wrong way to do it. But I would be just saying, don't get too bogged down in technique or anything, but just get as much as possible. Replace some of the long running with kind of some soloing and carrying the ball with you, because ultimately that's how you develop your skills. Like in some of the videos there that you have, you even have we've one of the samples here is a double tap solo, right? What a solo basically is a keepy up and you catching it. So again, you're trying to get the kids just to practice keepy uppies and solos and stuff like that, because that'll add to it. That video there is Jamie practicing the high catch, and one of the keys there is you talk about your head, hands and feet. So that's where a parent can help the child say, well, your head was tilted or your eyes were closed and stuff like that. So that's what we're trying to do with them type of videos.
Colm, just when it comes to the GAA and the possibility to be able to train in small groups, like the 3 or 4, like obviously the examples you've given there on your own are brilliant, but how much more of an advantage would it be, and how much better would it be for coaches, for players, for everybody, if we were able to get to a situation in a couple of months' time where 3 or 4 people are able to train in a socially distanced manner?
Well, look, without sounding corny, as Jurgen Klopp said, like football is the most important of the unimportant things, right? And we all get, but there's a well-being that's needed here. Like fellas want to kick around and girls indeed want to kick around. So it would be fantastic for their well-being. You know, anybody I spoke to within the club and within the county, right, they just missed having a kick around. You know, now they would stick to any guidelines. Like in fairness, like I was preparing myself for the 18th of May, thinking that you could come back in groups of 4 or 5s, and I was designing sessions there that would suit them, you know, in terms of where players would have no social contact, where they would warm up in isolation, they would wear their gloves, bring their own water bottle. They would work in patches of the pitch where they can only have 5 in it, so no contact. You could work on your kick passing, your hand passing, your shooting. You could plan sessions. Okay, so again, we'll still do that, like, but we'll move it back to July now, really. But it would do fellas so much to get down to the pitch, to open their legs, to kick, you know, to sort of breathe in the fresh grass, because that's ultimately what we are. Like, I mean, we're Gaelic footballers, and we do it because we love it. Like, and you know, when you're missing it, it's like something's been swiped from you. And you know, as again, I know I keep it in context. It's not that important, right? But from the well-being fact it would be immense to get back.
Davy Fitz was out yesterday, kind of fairly unhappy, I think it's fair to say, with the statement yesterday, especially because it went against what was brought out from the government on Friday to a point with the roadmap. That, like, as you say, there's a well-being element to it. It's something that I guess a lot of county players might have been expecting to come sooner than July 20th as well, to be able to stay well apart from your teammates, but being able to train and do some sort of skill work at least. Yeah, well, like when that statement came, like I had a look at it there, and like, number one, there's some fantastic people on it with far more knowledge about the health and well-being of the population and the GAA than me. So again, I'm quite happy to follow them guidelines, and I know all my fellow coaches and people involved in teams are the same. And what you're really looking for is guidance. So I look, it's the hope that kills you, and we're hoping to get back, right? So I mean, I'm quite happy to be told like that. When July comes, there may be something. I'm quite happy to be told there may be a championship. I'm quite happy. We all expected that the club scene was going to come back first, and that makes sense. Now, I was thinking about this a while back. Like, that's the way the GAA was formed. Like years and years ago, you represented your county based on your club performances. Like, you didn't train together as a county. You didn't come together as a county. That's quite a new phenomenon. And you have Paul Rouse on there regular. I'm sure he would tell you about that. But that's quite a new phenomenon, right? So we're probably going to go back to that, which is no harm, really. Look, everyone will have the same level of fitness. Everyone will have the same level of preparation. So, you know, from that point of view, it'll be very, very interesting. And look, if it's behind closed doors, if you have a Saturday evening at home and there's 2 or 3 matches on the TV,
that'll give the population an enormous boost and something to do, especially older people who love watching games. So there is a trade-off here, and I know there's a risk element, but nobody's going to force these players to play or coaches to be involved. If people don't want to be involved, that'll be respected, and that's 100%. If people want to be involved, they have to kind of weigh off the risk themselves. But I'd be hopeful that you could have a situation where you'll have a championship match on in October on TV, and people watching at home.
Right, that's one of the more optimistic views certainly I've heard around this statement yesterday that was released by the GEA. Just before we wrap, Colm, I'd imagine even thinking about football and talking about football has provided a good distraction for you as well. I understand you work in the Department of Foreign Affairs, and I'd imagine that the last couple of months at this point have been very unusual.
Yes, it has. I work in the passport service, and that's currently being suspended. But we've been all redeployed to assist our consular division, and it's been fascinating, right? And as a father of kind of a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old, it's very reassuring to know that you have the support of the Irish government behind you if you were travelling. What we done was we put in place phone lines, and they were manned 24/7 initially. And basically what you had was people all around the world inquiring about what's the current situation in the country they are and back home, and can we assist them in any way. And it was brilliant that these calls were answered within minutes, so people had reassurance from the Irish government. That you have the citizens register. If young people are travelling or on the citizens register, the government can assist them then because they'd have an idea of where they are. If the TravelWise app, with updates all the change in demographics of different countries and decisions to open and reopen and stuff like that. You also had concerned parents back home ringing and asking, what could be done if their daughter or son had to leave here, there, or whatever, So it was a really, really interesting time. Now it's quieting down a little at the moment, but it's fascinating to see just exactly what the Irish government and the Department of Foreign Affairs does, like in a times of crisis like this.
Good stuff, Colm. It sounds like you've been busy on and off the pitch, and I'm looking forward to seeing the video released this afternoon. So thanks a million for making the time for us this morning and for providing this week's Off the Couch. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Thanks.
Today's episode of Off the Couch with me, GAA coach Colm Nally, will be live across the OTV channels from 1 o'clock today. Off the Couch is brought to you in association with Joint Ace. Joint Ace is packed with trace minerals, vitamins and nutrients to support a fit and healthy lifestyle at any age. Check out jointace.com for more. We've got a very special extended show for you this morning, episode 1 of State of the Union. It's a new hour-long rugby podcast with Keith Wood, and some of the brightest minds in the game is coming your way in just a moment. A reminder that Tommy Walsh is going to join Nathan, and John Giles is going to pick his all-time Ireland 11 on tonight's show from 7 o'clock. Fergus McFadden joins us tomorrow morning to look back on his career here on OTB AM. We've got the Crappy Quiz, Mount Rushmore from Tipperary, Alan Quinlan and Michael Quinlivan. They both would have had a shout, no? I mean, because of the hurling, certainly, like Michael Quinlivan, is Michael Quinlivan their best ever footballer? Or was it Alan Brown? What was the tip footballer, the legendary tip footballer? Putting you on the spot there, Owen.
You have put me on the spot. What was his first name? You were right with his surname.
Anyway, apologies for that, Mr. Brown. Subscribe to the OTB AM podcast. It's fully timestamped, making it easy to find exactly what you want from every morning's 2-hour show, even from the 3.5-hour show from this morning. You can check back via YouTube either. Declan Brown, of course. I didn't want to say Darren because obviously he did something else. Right. Today we had Thursday Sports Pages, Anthony Moyes and the future of the GAA and rebooting the economy, referee Martin McAnally, leash defender Eric Killeen, rugby with Johnny Murphy, and Off the Couch with Colm Nally. It's been a very busy show for you. More to come, and this is the first episode of State of the Union, Keith Wood's State of the Union. Enjoy.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio. OTB Sports Radio.
Here at OTB, we're not just about sport. Our man Richie McCormick knows his tunes. Every day at midday, Richie will be bringing us his Isolation Mix. It's an hour of music to help you switch off from the workday, even if you're working from home. Stick on the mix, get some fresh air, and take a walk while remembering to keep your 2-meter social distance, of course. That's Richie's Isolation Mix every day at midday on OTB Sports Radio. Listen on the Go Loud app or at offtheball.com/radio.
This is OTB Sports Radio.
Right, you're very welcome along to episode 1 of Keith Wood's State of the Union. Our guests this week are Stuart Barnes and Giles Morgan, who is a former head of sponsorship for HSBC. You're both very welcome, and thanks very much for joining us. Keith, before we kind of ask the lads for their opinion, I want to set the table a little bit. This is kind of off the back of multiple conversations that we've been having over the years about the very difficult state that rugby, professional rugby in particular, has managed to back itself into. And with everything that's going on, the analogy that David McWilliams always used about when the tide goes out, you get to see who's been swimming naked. And in many respects, rugby has been swimming in the nude for a couple of years, and the tide is very much on its way out. So that's kind of setting the table for why we're having these conversations.
Yeah, it is. I think we were going to have this a couple of years ago, but sometimes you need the time for reflection. And when there's no live sport on, this is a time to ask as many questions as you possibly can to see. We're a very young professional sport. So rugby went professional 25 years ago. It's still a baby, and it's come a huge way in that period of time. And it's become an awful lot of things that we thought it wouldn't. Most of those are very, very good. Some of them are not so good. And I think with COVID at the present moment in time, and we're going to talk about finances of the game. We're going to talk about different issues within the game, but we're not going to talk about them in relation to this particular area of lockdown, because this is extraordinary in all sense. But we take this time of lockdown to go back and say, would you have done things a little bit differently? And if you would have, is it worth maybe looking at them now again to try and see if they could change again? Because we just see time after time after time that clubs and unions are under financial problems all the time. There are some problems with the actual physical game itself, but the running of the game is always on tenterhooks. So I think that's the nature of it. And I delved into my phone or my black book to try and find guys that I've known over a long period of time, people either I've worked with or respected, or fought with, and maybe a little bit of all three of those, just to see different opinions that are out there. And like our idea is over the next 6 or 8 weeks is to try and delve into something else, have a different opinion, and whether we can come to any assumptions at the end. And we know we don't have any monopoly on having any of the answers, and we're not right, but we want to try and make certain we can ask as many questions as we can.
The fundamental question is, if you had a reset button, what would the net result of that reset be?
Well, I think we want the game to be sustainable. We want it to be something that isn't in a panic every year. We'd like it to be in a situation where there isn't a chance of a big fight or schism every year. And we haven't fully sat down with that. And now, bearing in mind, I think a huge amount of the game has gone unbelievably well. And but I still go back to the day, I think it was Ken Reid, who was president of the IRFU, standing on the steps on the plane as we were flying down to Johannesburg for the World Cup in 1995, saying that Ireland would never embrace professionalism. And the game went open and professional 6 weeks later. So we knew we weren't exactly set for it. And we knew that the game something was going to happen because of the huge commerciality that had started to come in on television rights. So we flew at 1 million miles an hour into a new professional sport. I think at times we may have stepped away from the 100 years of quality administration that had gone on beforehand. And I think we need to have some sort of a reset in that.
Okay, well, this is a good chance to bring the lads in. Your mics are both on mute there, so maybe just, Charles, if I can start with you, because I'm very interested in what the business world makes of what it's like to deal with the rugby world at the moment. What were the rugby unions and the rugby organisations like to deal with from a business perspective?
Well, I think the problem with nearly every sport that I've ever dealt with as a sponsor, I don't have any bragging rights as a former player of anything, so I can only say it is a boring suit, is that sports historically was set up in an amateur era and then became professional, which means most sports are fractured and factionalized, and you have people who are seeking to serve their own needs rather than necessarily the holistic approach. If you were inventing sports from scratch, you wouldn't start with where most sports are structured now. And that's probably where the problem is. And what Woody mentioned earlier is that professionalism happened very fast. And I'm not even sure rugby exactly knew what it wanted to be in a commercial world. So it's been playing catch up ever since. So I would say, to answer your question, working with the rugby fraternity has been a joy for me over a 30-year career, because I understand the game and I understand the people involved, and it's a great sport to be involved with. But commercially, it's had its challenges and it's been very fractured. And as you're now seeing big money coming in through private equity and people who are seeking to make it a profit, it has confused the game yet further. And what I'm hoping, and I suspect most sports administrators are hoping, is that this period of this unfortunate global pandemic is that there is a reset where people can establish who they want to be, what they want to be, and find a way of doing it in a sustainable way.
Yeah. Stuart, I don't know if you can hear us okay there.
I'm really sorry. I'm coming in and out all the time. I don't understand why. I've been trying to fix this Bluetooth, but I'm hearing most of it. I faded a bit with Giles, but got the general gist, yeah.
The reset button, if we had a magic reset button, what would come out the other side of professional rugby? How would it look?
Well, that's what I need here at the moment. Magic reset button. It was interesting what Keith said about the game was driven professional in a shot in a 6-week spell in '95. And I think if you look back at it now, I think what happened, it was driven so far and so fast by 100% commercial interest. Commercial interest of Murdoch really drove rugby, and rugby was stunned. Ireland changed, they went professional in 6 weeks. England didn't have a clue. The management put their head in the sand. I think if you could change the reset button, I think you would have to have a balance. Now, I've always been a fairly radical person in my opinions. And when it went professional, I thought it was a wonderful thing for the game. I thought people like me who had been up at 6 in the morning would go train in lunchtime, would train to 10 o'clock, 4 days a week. You'd get recompensed. It would be wonderful. But the balance of decision making on where this game was going between the game, rugby union, and between the commercial imperative, we didn't find a halfway house. We went out on the far end, the far right, if you like, of the commercial side, and players didn't mind because we had untold wealth. You know, people like Keith and I never thought we'd get anything. It was fantastic from a playing point of view. But I think the shape of the deal and has impacted upon rugby, and it has been always, the game has always lagged behind the profit motive. And I think that is the major problem of the game. And because of that, when this pandemic came, because we didn't have a sensible balance between what the game needed and what profit wanted, we found ourselves torn apart almost.
That's interesting, Stuart. I was trying to look at the different models that happen within sport, and there isn't any one that I would look out and say that's perfect for what rugby union needs. Yeah. But there are elements that are almost in control of their own competition. So if you look at NFL, which has a very structured season, a limited regular season, and then playoffs at the end of it. Now, there is no international component to it, but they do have a big structure with it. But that is done entirely for owners and for big finance at the very end of it. And yet that level of control for me seems to be a very good situation if it was being run for part of the game, as almost for the betterment of the game. So when I look at the very start, going back to 95, 96, there were 3 outliers in the game. One were the Japanese clubs that were very set up along that corporate commercial idea. So they're very different and very self-secure and self-funding in their own way. But the English and the French clubs were immediately at loggerheads with their unions. And so there seemed to be an argument over the use of who owned the player and the primacy of the contract. And that seemed to be the most difficult element under which to think of. For me, when I look at the reset, is there a chance or an opportunity for the RFU and the Premier clubs, because some of those are likely to go out of existence under the present structure? Is there an opportunity for those to lead world rugby or lead professional rugby together in England? Is that possible? And does that change the whole global landscape?
Well, it changes the whole global landscape. It happens, of course, because, well, going into the pandemic, England was probably the most powerful economic force in this tournament. The problem, and it is a problem before you address the possibilities, is that the RFU's failure to deal with this in day one enabled a bunch of businessmen who had an eye on rugby and an eye on profit to take control of the clubs. And there has been a simmering war between club and country that has gone on since 1995 in England. And I cannot see any way in which the club owners will hand over their priceless commodities. I mean, in the players, they talk about player safety and player welfare, but the players are the pawns in this game. And right now, the clubs have them. And interestingly, Keith, I think the only way you would get them back is if the risk was taken somewhat out of the owner's hands. But that would mean what you said about the NFL, it's really interesting because in terms of profit, it's an unbelievably sort of hardcore viral capitalism. Yet in terms of the organization, there's something socialist about it because they're all in it together. So basically, they look after each other than sort of in terms of selling various products. But the marketing of the game, the television of the game, all the profit is, as you say, a collective. And I think unless union goes collective in England with its clubs, there's no possible way that you will have club and country agreeing. The weaker clubs might say, we can see a way out of this, we'll do a deal with you. But you've got clubs like Bristol where Steve Lansdowne is an incredibly wealthy man, and they're not, he's pumped a lot of money into this game in a very short term time. He's not going to say, we'll hand over. Bruce Craig down the road where I live here in Bath has long been viewed as thinking, I came into this game to run Bath, they're my club, I'm not handed it over. It is still very difficult. I accept and I hope that something good to come out of where we are now with coronavirus is that we're going to be forced into acting together. But it's going to take a vice-like grip to pull club and country together right now.
The NFL is always a great example, I think, to bring up, but it's essentially a monopoly, and they all work together as a cabal to keep new entrants out. I mean, they've crushed new entrants in the past, and what they do is they've done a deal with the players. And there's a power that the players have that I think that they haven't fully recognized in all this. The players should say that we're only going to play a certain amount of games every year, and then the unions and the clubs would have to fight out how often those players represented both of them. That would be one way of doing this. We're going to play 20 games a year because that's all our bodies can take, or 22 games a year, and begin negotiations that way and force the clubs to say, well, we'll pay 40% or 50% of your salary, and the international team can play the rest, unless there's some kind of buyout from the unions in England to buy a portion of the clubs.
Yeah, the problem there is that we are comparing an unlike with a like. And rugby's big problem is it thinks it is a major player. It's not football. It's not a global game. It doesn't have the financial clout of American football. And so the problem is, I by the way, think the players have been given a very hard time in this. But you look at their salaries now, and you look at the input of finance that comes into the game that reflects the position of the game on the global entertainment stage. And the players, if they say we want to play less, we're going to play 20 games, we're going to be the country fit for a club, and their income will come down. Because I don't, though I believe that less is more, and I think fewer games will make them better players, and it will make, I hate the word, but the product something better. I just don't think rugby has the commercial clout for its players to dictate how many games they will play.
Well, and I would agree, Stuart, with that. I think there's a great irony in the land of the free that NFL, that they have the draft system, which is pure genius in terms of keeping the collective going. Yeah. And I also think that rugby's major problem, you've just put your finger on it, that it was never ready to go global, and it's never been a global game. Sevens has got the best chance of going global, but that's a very different game from 15s, and the two need to be separated out. And I have I have an experience of both sides commercially and seen it both. And the trouble is, it's almost like rugby has an identity crisis. It thinks it's something it's not, and it doesn't know who it wants to be. And then you get the wrong type of investment coming in, which is not necessarily for the good of the game. And you get to this point, which rugby's been sort of going headlong towards this brick wall for a while. And it actually requires, like so many things in the world right now, where there's going to be a kind of dead still moment, which we're in, for everybody to reevaluate. Because if the game, it's very interesting with World Rugby and obviously their re-elections, what does it want to be? Because at the moment, I don't think anybody has a clear mandate of what it wants to be.
I think we're finding almost an uncomfortable level of agreement, which is unusual from very different people. But yes. I'd looked at the World Rugby elections, and I know Bill Beaumont pretty well. I know Gus Pichot very well, listening to what they were saying. And actually, there wasn't a huge amount of difference between their viewpoint. One just happened to be 25 years younger than the other. That seemed to be an awful lot of what it was, and everybody presumed that things would change an awful lot with a younger guy taking on the mantle. For me, I have a fear always when we talk about the global game, that we want to make rugby global, bigger. We want to go everywhere. We want to be in every country. Isn't it brilliant? We have another 10 countries now are part of it. There's a joy in sport, in different sports. So in Ireland, there's a huge joy in the ubiquity of GAA. In every village, there's a Gaelic football team or a hurling team. And it's almost generational. And it fits into that generational idea that happens. And it's part and parcel of everywhere. For rugby to try and go into every village, for me, is a struggle, because rugby is incredibly complex, physical, and dangerous sport.
But Keith, don't you also think that there's a sort of imperialistic, assumptive arrogance that everybody wants rugby union in every country around the world? I agree with you. I think that there are very few sports that can claim to be global, and very few that could become global. They tend to be the simplest ones, like athletics, like football, because they're fundamentally simple to understand. I'm not sure. We've all grown up. You guys were great players. I played my sort of lousy level, but I'm still a 15-a-side rugby player, and it's my game. I love it. Yeah. But try and explain it. Take kids to a game of 15-a-side, particularly a 3-all in the wind and rain, ain't easy. In a way that basketball actually is very easy to take kids. It's like tennis. The ball goes up and down. Do I think 15-a-side is a better game philosophically? 100%. But I agree. I think the biggest error that World Rugby made, and I know it was all about the Olympics and the Sevens, but again, I never think they differentiated properly between the two, not codes, but you take my point, is when they rebranded to be World Rugby, because it took them down a road where they had to be their own brand. When actually the International Rugby Board, okay, it's not a very snappy title, but at least it wasn't trying to be global. It was just representative of the countries who played. And I think this World Rugby, where I hear press release after press release, I probably wrote a few myself, about the globality of the game and going to every corner. It's a nonsense. It can't happen. It won't happen.
Charles, Bill Beaumont, when he got elected on Sunday, I looked at something from his press conference, and he said, we must make this great sport, and again, there is this imperial thing of it, this great sport of ours even better. Fine, we all agree with that. Simpler, that makes me worry, because there's a complexity and a depth to the game. Safer, we all agree with that, and more accessible. So this whole thing about more is simpler, more accessible. Why? Do we want to go to every country in the world and have 20 players playing it, so we could come up with a press release, which God knows we would, saying under World Rugby, every country in the world now plays it? It really doesn't matter. It has to maintain a depth, and it has to maintain a magic. just by spreading the game with the odd bit of sevens here or there, or the odd 15s team, does not achieve anything. More becomes less then. And I think we have it wrong. We shouldn't be worried about simplicity. We should actually avoid accessibility. For 20 years, I have been writing stuff since I hung my boots up about why are we obsessed, and I think I've had a chat with Keith on this, why are we so obsessed with the American market? We're driven by a blind profit. Rugby can make money, but it seems to want to make millions, billions of bucks, and it sees America and the Asian market. But Bill is always quoting the Asian market all the time. He would give away the game to grow it in areas where we would have to simplify it and essentially change it from what it has been for 120 years. And I've gone almost 360 degrees from being a rugby radical when I played to being what sounds like an old fart, because I don't think the game needs to change. I don't want rugby union to be rugby league. I have nothing against rugby league, but I think rugby union has so much complexity and intellectual side to it. It's a far better game.
And the reason I led HSBC into, as you know, we did a couple of Lions tours, and that's the 15s, the pinnacle of the tradition, and they were wonderful sponsorships. But the reason I led the HSBC Sevens program was I felt very strongly that this was the one shot that rugby had to go more international, more global, because the game is terribly easy to understand. And kids, it's 7-a-side, but it's touch, it's tag, it's girls and boys, it's participation. And yes, I can see sevens being played in schools in India and China, but what I've felt, and I've been disappointed in a sort of, but move on, Giles, it's okay, life keeps going, is that I don't think that sevens has fully embraced the Olympic piece did. To go onto the Olympic stage is extraordinary. And that's because everyone's tried to blend sevens and 15s together. They're totally different. And the two can coexist a bit like Test match cricket and 2020 cricket. I love the longer form of both games, right? But if I'm going to take the game into new markets, I'm not taking 15-a-sides ever.
It's interesting on that, Giles. I mean, and I know we've had some of this discussion in the past. Rugby sevens is one of the great participation sports, right? It's incredible to play. If you're a young kid and you're fit and you're fast and you've got some decent skills, it's not as physical. It's a very different, it's a short form. It's over in a period of time. It fits with business in a brilliant way for networking. It isn't sitting down for 80 minutes. There's an awful lot of movement. You can have a bit of louder noise in it. It is something to be able to market to places that are not particularly used to it. It is simple. It is the joy, actually, of football. When you watch it globally, is every kid can kick a ball. Everybody could nearly coach it. Everybody could nearly ref it. Now, as it gets further up, it becomes more difficult. But the actual basis of the game is purely simple. For me, rugby is not simple. It's complex. I know it, because when you sit in a stand and everybody sees that there may be 7 or 8 infringements at every single ruck, and each person who sees one of them is right. So it's how does that fit into the spirit of the game and the flow of it? At times we've been kind of struggling to make it black and white so that we make it more simple. I think it's added to more confusion in terms of it. But yet there is still a joy to that level of complexity. But the other side, I would say to it, in trying to spread a game of such complexity, is that injury and the risk to injury becomes very high. You need the coaches to be incredibly well skilled, but also to have played it, to know the nuance, understand the nuance. You need the referees to have played it, to know and understand the nuance. And it becomes incredibly physical, incredibly quickly. And I think that is, in the urge to fill every corner of the world with rugby, I think we don't quite get there at all. I think we have a risk to that level.
Can I ask a question then of, and maybe Stuart, I might come to you on this one. The Pro 14 has obviously embraced the idea of having clubs from South Africa play, and there's a league that fulfills a function with Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and the 2 South African teams and the Italian teams. It seems like we tried to spread the gospel of the Pro 14 to certain areas, and it seems like the Premiership in England hasn't quite been successful in terms of making the clubs standalone businesses that would have made profit without the CBC money last year, for example. So even taking the kind of the bones of your argument about the global game, has the same thing happened in a way where we've tried to expand the club game too quickly in these islands? And is it resulting in the same thing where actually that is unsustainable too?
Well, there's no doubt at all. I mean, the Pro 14 has grown because of its economic needs. And the South African input is marginal to the point of pointless. Because rugby also, if you watch a game of rugby on television, and this is where the money's coming from, and it's the television deal, you need not just a good game of rugby, you need an atmosphere, because you can watch something that is of reasonable quality, and if not many people are there, you'll find it very hard to get interested. Where the English game has done quite well is because it's local. It's like football. There's local rivalries everywhere. There's always atmosphere, and atmosphere can mask inadequacy. And I think that's why, as a longer-term project, France has this fantastic ability to have a Southwest derby, to have a Parisian game. And I think in France, it works. In England, it has the potential to work. But in Pro 14, it is stretching and getting weaker and weaker.
For me, Pro 14, I don't like it as a competition. I've never quite understood, and I do understand because of Italy being in the Six Nations, but the need to put Italian sides with no history, no sense of rivalry into the midst of a Celtic competition. And for me, the comfort of, and the South African teams for me, I think are an absolute waste of time. And I think in terms of player welfare, deciding that in the middle of your season, and especially for international players, to suddenly have to pop down and play a game at the High Veld, or to play games, for me, it isn't particularly right. I've always been a fan to try and go on that sense of rivalry. So for me, I'm still looking for change. I would love to have a British and Irish league, because I think the sense of rivalry that we see in the Six Nations can be mirrored at a club game across with Leicester and Leinster or Munster. You know the crowds that are going to turn up to those sort of things. Because of actually the Heineken Cup, what it did show over the years was that there is a huge appetite for that battle and that contest and those inbuilt rivalries that happen over the year. And yet that is a market that could be done properly, but it would have to be done in a fair fashion where pretty much every team will get the same amount of money. If you're 10 teams from England, there'd be 10 times the same amount of money. So Scottish teams would only get 2 units, the English would get 10 units. That would be the way it would work. But there has to be something that fits a little bit better, especially on the back of COVID, as to whether there's going to be a huge amount of travel or not travel, or where you want to be going to the other side of the world all the time to do different things, whether the closer proximity, we can make that into something that unifies it even a bit more.
But I think if you look at the history of sport, and Ed Smith, the writer, now England cricket selector, has done, he writes reams of books, great writer on the history of sport. And at every point in the last 180 years, sort of since the Victorian playing fields of the public school, there have been punctuated moments where invention or circumstances affected where sport goes. So the telegram pushed racing forward, then radio, then television, jet travel opened up sport in a way that we've never seen before. The internet, digitization, all of these things have happened, which have pushed sport further and further into the sort of vast tendrils of geography. And what we've got now happening, and we don't know what the future looks like, but it probably is a future with less travel because of cost and fear and quarantine, etc., is that this sense of, well, the sky is the limit, we can go anywhere, will have to reduce. And to your point, in rugby, I hadn't thought about it until we talked about it, Keith, is that the concept of a British and Irish league, where, and I really like your comment, Stuart, about atmosphere can mask a certain inadequacy. What we want is a great event with a good battle, And if there's Sublime Rugby Union as part of the experience, fantastic. But this constant need to expand, which is driven by sponsor and media, it's almost inexorable because that's what human beings do. Now we've got a moment in time where expediency will see there will be less sponsorship in the game because the commercial profits are going to be reduced in the corporate sector. Media is going to be different. Travel is going to be different. And it may be going back to a more basic model, as you talked about, is actually a really strong future for rugby.
I think also that I don't like the talk of sportsmen being and sportswomen being role models. I believe that they do their job, they do their thing, and they do it well. And that's the focus. But I think here we've got a chance for the sport of rugby, instead of just talking about how great sport being better, blah, 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 we could actually become a role model because we haven't addressed, and I'm a great believer, I'm long felt this way, I think we're in a climate crisis. And the seven-a-side, we are jetting all over the world. We've got 10 tournaments. We are crisscrossing the planet non-stop. It's a terrible example. And I've been thinking about that. I'm thinking if sevens is to sustain as a great sport, it has to play in sort of a European region, an Asian region. It can't just keep going back and forth. Super Rugby has the same problem. It travels too far. The Rugby Championship, New Zealand will play Argentina, will fly from Auckland to Buenos Aires and fly back. That is almost obscene. And we have to cut back. And there's an opportunity. New Zealand as a rugby nation, and Woody's played there, will know if they went back to their sort of Auckland playing Canterbury, the Waikato against Otago, they'd have a magnificent tournament. Australia, it's failing dismally for them. All they're doing is clocking up more air miles. They need to strengthen Queensland and Sydney. Stop worrying about going to Victoria, where rules is so strong. Don't waste money in markets you will fail. Concentrate, refine what you have and be strong. And I think that applies to the Southern Hemisphere, and I think it applies to our hemisphere. It's what Giles just said. Let's come back to what we can do. Let's pack crowds in. You know, let's get back to a day when maybe Arthur playing Cardiff and it used to be 15,000 on a Tuesday night. Let's energise Welsh rugby again. And it will be energised not by playing the Cheetahs with 2 Welsh supporters flying to Bloemfontein. It'll be hugely energised by travelling 1 millionth of the distance across the Severn Bridge to Bath. That's what could get this game going again.
Even when you start talking about Australia, Barnesy, one of my favourite sporting occasions is not rugby union, it's rugby league, the state of origin.
Yeah. Yes.
It's you go back and play from where you're from, and it's New Zealand or New South Wales against Queensland. It is the most conservative structure of all time, and it's an unbelievable success. It is just phenomenal, and it is a rivalry. And actually, so I was there for on an Irish tour years ago, and I couldn't get over the excitement that was going with it, and I got caught up in it because of rivalry. And rivalries don't happen because of a plucked team and a new team that makes something happen. It happens because of history. And I do think that's one of the things that we've done. I go back to it. I'm in huge support of the vast majority of what's happened in professional rugby, but we cannot get rid of the 100 years of rivalry that happened beforehand. And that becomes a really big element.
And it's something you're both more aware of than I could ever be. But look at the Lions. The Lions is probably the most valuable commodity, and I mean that. God, I sound like a marketer. I'll stop that. But in terms of what it means to be a Lions supporter, let alone a Lion as you both are, is something that is built on history. And some people talk it as anachronistic. I don't think it is anachronistic. I think it's the foundation of the game and needs to be reminded that that is what matters most of all for rugby. I really do.
Well,
very strangely, Barnesy, very, very strangely, when we talk about the Lions as being anachronistic and something that doesn't fit into the game, the Lions is actually the lifeblood for the Southern Hemisphere nations. There is a type of global bartering system in terms of how money is moved around for matches that are played in Lansdowne or in Twickenham or in Cardiff or wherever, that the Lions is essential. So the Lions effectively bails out a lot of the Southern Hemisphere countries when they go down there. Now, I think that's a really good idea in some respects, but also I think there needs to be a little bit more freedom and more fairness in how some of the teams are played. So if I give an example, and the reason to touch on it, if New Zealand come and play in Dublin, they don't get a share of the tickets. They get their cost paid when they land. That's what happens. And so, and that's justified by the fact that actually Ireland would put players into the Lions every 4 years and they'll tour the Southern Hemisphere, and that Southern Hemisphere would get a huge amount of money. It is a sense of bartering. Yet if New Zealand were coming up to play and got a fee for playing and maybe got a win bonus for playing, and if Fiji did the same, there's an opportunity for those old established countries that don't have the resources that some of the countries have to have a little piece more of the pie. That's one of the elements I think that would need to have to change.
I agree with that. The other tournament we haven't mentioned is the holiest of holies from a European perspective, which is the Six Nations. But I think we probably should call it the Five Nations, because Italy's a wonderful spot. Travelling to Rome for a game is a great jolly. But the Five Nations has been sustained not by the excellence of the rugby, by any shape of the stretch of the imagination. And since this game has gone professional, we've had the main great rivalries have been initially New Zealand versus Australia, and now we're back to New Zealand versus South Africa. But what our wonderful tournament has is that tight tribal rivalry. You know, you don't go to Ireland, it's great afterwards, but by God, there's not a person in green who's going to wish you well beforehand. And that's as it should be. And Wales will play Ireland, Scotland will play England. And so often, you know, again, since I hung my boots up, I have watched many a Six Nations game. I've seen, you know, probably every England game and a lot more than that. And the quality of most of these games is often pretty poor. But fans go away and they're delighted or they're desolate, because the result counts, because it is not just about quality of it, it is about the occasion. And that gets back to what we're talking about with Pro 14 and about Italian teams in that tournament and South Africans. The occasion is everything. The occasion is everything. And sometimes I don't think broadcasters understand that themselves until it's too late.
Giles, can I ask you a question about, you know, you've obviously presented in boardrooms and built sponsorship and plans and activation plans around your sponsorship. If you were to go in and say, we're actually going to focus on a sport that's going to get smaller in the coming years, and here's the rationale for doing that, would you still get the investment from your board that you require to do that?
Well, the thing about sponsorship is sponsorship should be an answer to a business need, right? So for HSBC, something like Sevens was a perfect fit for an international company with sort of global hotspot cities around the world. But to Stuart's point, the planet has been bleeding for a long time, and we haven't really been paying much attention to it. And now we've had this COVID. One of the, if joy is the right word, but seeing the planet starting to heal itself is one of the things that people are talking about. The realization is the ozone layer is beginning to repair itself. I think that a lot of corporations, whilst they may be international conglomerates, are going to be structured in a much more regional and domestic way, because costs of being structured in a much more global way as they have been are going to be different. And therefore, there may well be businesses that say, well, we used to invest in global events, etc. We'll be going, actually, we're going to focus on the markets that matter and keep it more domestic. So it's a clumsy answer to say that if I were doing my old role at HSBC now, or in the next 6 months as we come out of this crisis, I suspect that the HSBC business plan will be very different, as every big international conglomerate is having to rethink. And as a result of it, sponsorship has to rethink, because sponsorship should only be a reflection of the business. And therefore, I can see in the past, HSBC never touched domestic rugby in the UK because it was always the world's local bank. It used to be the marketing platform behind it. I think you'll see HSBC UK being a much more domestic-looking business going forward, and therefore domestic sponsorships of golf, rugby, cricket, whatever it chooses to do, will be much more of interest. So I think rugby should play into its strength, which is what Keith was saying, which is the strength of rugby is its tradition, its heritage, the friendships, the spirit, all of those things, which are very positive vibes that boring corporations yearn to be involved with. I'm much more interested in a modern rugby that goes back to its roots of how it was socialised.
A Lions League essentially is the solution, I think, Keith, that you're suggesting here. I mean, the branding would be perfect. It would help tie in nicely with the Lions every 4 years. We're miles away from that happening. Is it a realistic outcome at the end of this, do you think? Or is the hyper-localisation that the lads are talking about here going to mean that England protects the clubs, France protects the clubs, and the scenario that we have at the moment is essentially locked in?
Well, that's an interesting point on that. France protect the clubs, England protect the clubs. The bulk of money in rugby works through international rugby. You know, it's 80 to 90% of all the money that comes in on it. So instead of having a club and a union fighting over the same players and dictating who has primacy and when you can play, that needs to be done together. The professional part of rugby in England needs to have some coming together. It isn't about getting the RFU taking over the clubs. It is about helping some of the owners get back some of the money that they've put into it. But it is about trying to make certain you're not dragging players left, right, and centre all the time. It is also about trying to have players in a club in England that qualify to play for England. And at the present moment in time, because of players playing for England and you're elongating the system, the squads have become an awful lot bigger, and they're supplanted with players from the Southern Hemisphere to try and make certain that when the English players are gone away, that they can actually make gains. Those clubs can make gains. That's an issue. That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The season is still far too long to be trying to be playing for 46 or 47 weeks of a year because you have a whole variety of different competitions. Actually doesn't make any sense in terms of longevity or viability or sustainability of the players.
But what we got here, the real problem is the RFU, England are not trying to protect their clubs. Clubs and country are not a partnership, they're the problem. And what Woody has just said there about too many games, because the clubs feel they have to play the games. They have to play the games to keep CVC, to keep BT happy. They want to play them and they want to play more and more. And the international game, it wants more than its slice of pie. And again, this goes back all the way to the start of this podcast when we talked about the game getting driven professionally very quickly. France and England are not part of the overall game because clubs, they're the two countries, great financial power, but ones where the clubs dominate. So we keep hearing every week you hear talk about the global league. And until you can come up with a deal for the clubs, that's not going to happen. But there is not a willingness for this to happen unless ground is given to the clubs. We've seen it with the Lions. The clubs are a new creation. They are a financial creation, and they are not part, they don't see themselves a part of any global solution. World Rugby doesn't see them as part of the operation. Time and again, the PRL, the English clubs will say, we never hear a thing. No one in World Rugby ever speaks to us. And that's wrong. I can understand why World Rugby would rather that the English and French clubs did not exist. It would make their lives a whole lot easier, but they do exist.
And again, it goes a bit to what we were talking about, the factionization, and you asked earlier about, you know, how is it to deal with sports? Well, most sports are very difficult to deal with as an outsider coming in because there's not a logic to it. And one of the sports that's interesting me in the last 3 or 4 years, what's very factional, all of the leaders of the various tours around the world in golf have come together in a way that you'll probably start seeing the tours becoming one, I would say, in the next 5 years, because they realize, one, the game is under threat, because whilst people play golf, it's not a growing sport. And therefore, expediency says, well, what are we going to do about this? We're going to pull together for the good of our game. I don't think rugby's got there, but that is good. It just may be often after wars and after great suffering, there is a sort of raising that then creates new shoots and new leaves. And maybe that's what's going to happen, or I hope could happen for rugby, is that there's going to be sufferance. There's going to be a sense of some of the clubs and the unions even are going to find financially they're in big trouble. And then maybe there's a day of reckoning, which is for the good of the game.
It seems like we're getting there really very quickly. Just the figures that have come out of the last couple of days about how much money the RFU are going to lose this year, best case scenario and worst case scenario. There's not that much difference between best case and worst case scenario. And likewise, the IRFU are going to struggle as well with the absence of games. So we might be hurtling towards that day of reckoning sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think there's a huge amount of some of those figures that have come out have been income. They've said they're going to lose out on over 100 million in income. Well, they also won't have a huge amount of cost that goes within that. And I think you have to be careful when you look at an awful lot of the figures. But I do think that day of reckoning is coming now. And actually, Stuart, you mentioned the one word there, because we do describe the French clubs and the English clubs as being outliers within world rugby. For want of a better phrase, within the world of rugby. And it isn't about knocking them over, though some of them may go by the wayside because they're under huge financial pressure at the moment. But it's the word that you mentioned was partnership. Like, what's the way of bringing them in the fold where they get a benefit, but where the game of rugby benefits? And the last part that we didn't discuss at all, which could be a whole new program, will be a whole new program, is how does that impact on amateur rugby and domestic rugby? Because we're only talking at the very top level of it. But we remember the fact that we all started playing rugby because we loved it, because we were kids and we thought it was a great game to play, and all the great attributes that come with it. And how does that fit within this model? And how is money taken aside out of the professional part of the game to make certain that amateur side of the game is able to grow significantly? Because you always need to try and build the numbers, but build the numbers in a heightened fashion. And but the day of reckoning is coming very, very close at the present moment in time, because when you go down the list of priorities for governments coming out of COVID, yes, they will want to support sports because sports are very good for body and mind and all that sort of side. Will they want to support professional sports? Because there are other things that the money is going to be needed for. And there's been huge supports put in place, especially in the UK. It's how sustainable they are going forward and what's going to happen when that stops. So I think the day of reckoning, this is a perfect time to have this conversation.
I think our culture is a crude one. We're obsessed with money. We're so obsessed that the only debate about where we are with COVID-19 and how we're coming out of it, or the predominant one, is the financial one. It's involved in profitability. It hasn't crossed Bill Sweeney, chief executive of the RFU's mind, that the whole world 6 years from now is not going to be where it was 6 months ago. There are all sorts of reasons why. This world is shrinking because our resources are finite. We still talk about the same old things. We're intellectually, imaginatively incapable of seeing that we can survive by being smaller. He said Twickenham's not going to go, the RFU's not going to go. So it gets back to what we said all the way to the front. Rugby isn't the world's biggest game. What is the crisis about it dropping back, about salaries being a bit smaller, about at a certain level players will have to be perhaps semi-professional? It isn't a crisis, except we can't even contemplate that at the moment. It could be an opportunity, but the only thing that is seen as success right now is the dollar bill. I think.
And what's interesting on that as well, and the thing that I take great comfort on, I expect we all do, with no live sport going on pretty much anywhere in the world, and we're all sports fans and we all miss it, is that there is going to be a massive change in the landscape, I think, in every sense, from the commercials to everything else, which is, I hope, a reduction. I agree with you. But the exciting thing is that I think that every sport in the world should remember is that we, the fans, have not gone away. And we still want to be the fans of the sports we were before, but it may be on a reduced level, but we don't stop that passion. And therefore there is an opportunity, but it looks different.
I think that's a great point to wrap up the first episode of Keith Wood's State of the Union. My thanks to our guests this week, to Stuart Barnes and to Giles Morgan. Really fascinating stuff, guys. Thanks a million. We've started a million conversations there. Hopefully they lead to plenty more in the coming weeks too. Cheers.
OTB Sports Radio.
Richard's rugger thing.